Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awakened Snow Fox power and got married to Rukia Kuchiki? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Frost-Forged Soul. The world was a symphony of heat and screaming. Smoke, thick and acrid, clawed at Naruto's lungs, each breath a fresh torment. The air itself shimmered, distorted by a heat so intense it felt like reality was melting at the edges. Somewhere to his left, Sasuke's Chidori shrieked, a desperate cry of lightning swallowed by the oppressive haze. To his right, Sakura's voice, sharp with panic, called out a warning that never reached its target. Their enemy was a phantom, a ghost made of heat and steel. His name was Kagero, a man whose name meant heat haze, and he was living up to the moniker with lethal efficiency. A former Anbu, the bingo book had said, a specialist in silent killing and misdirection. The book had failed to mention he could bend light and air with his chakra, creating perfect mirages that bled into the real world. Team 7 hadn't been hunting a man, they had been hunting a nightmare. Stay together. Kakashi's voice cut through the chaos, but it was a frayed, desperate command. Their famed teamwork was useless. Every feint was met by a blade from an unseen angle. Every attack passed through an illusion. They were bleeding, exhausted, and fighting shadows in a furnace of Kagero's making. Naruto dodged, a kunai laced with superheated chakra slicing the air where his throat had been. He spun, driving a Rasengan forward into the shimmering form of his attacker. Only for it to pass through harmlessly. The illusion dissolved like smoke. A searing pain erupted across his back as the real Kagero struck from behind. He bit back a cry, the smell of burnt flesh and his own blood filling his nostrils. "You're just a child." Kagero's voice was a dry rasp, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Loud, predictable. "You chase phantoms because you can't grasp reality. Shut up." Naruto roared, forming another clone. The anger was a familiar fire in his belly. It was his fuel, the one thing that had always pushed him past his limits. He funneled the Nine Tails chakra into his limbs, the red energy a visible cloak around him. The pain in his back subsided, the wound steaming as it began to close. He could feel Sasuke nearby, the Uchiha's frustration a palpable thing. Sasuke's Sharingan, which should have been their ultimate advantage, was being turned against him. The eye that saw through all deception was being flooded with so much false information that it was becoming a liability. A sudden, sharp cry from Sakura galvanized him. He turned, his heart seizing in his chest. Kagero stood over her, his blade pressed against her neck, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Kakashi was a dozen yards away, pinned down by two heat mirages that mimicked his own movements perfectly. Sasuke was panting, one eye squeezed shut, blood trickling from the other, as he tried to overcome the genjutsu-like effect of the heat distortions. They were broken, beaten. "It's over, Jinchuriki," Kagero rasped, his eyes fixed on Naruto. "Give me the scroll, and maybe the girl lives." Naruto's mind went blank. The scroll was their mission. It contained sensitive intel vital to Konoha's security. But looking at Sakura's terrified eyes, at the thin line of blood welling up where the heated blade touched her skin, the scroll meant nothing. "Let her go," Naruto said, his voice dangerously low. The red chakra around him began to bubble and churn. Kagero chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "You have nothing to bargain with." In that moment, the familiar rage, the burning power of the Nine Tails, wasn't enough. He needed more. He pushed, pulling on the fox's power with a desperation he hadn't felt in years. He needed to be faster, stronger. He needed to erase the smirk from Kagero's face. He shot forward, a red blur of pure fury. He was faster than he had ever been. The ground cracked under his feet. He saw Kagero's eyes widen slightly in surprise. He was closing the distance. 10 feet. 5. But it was a feint. The Kagero holding Sakura wasn't real. The searing, unimaginable pain that erupted in his chest was a complete shock. He looked down. A blade, glowing with an orange heat, protruded from his sternum. The real Kagero stood behind him, having appeared from nowhere. His expression one of cold triumph. The blade had been driven through his back, aimed perfectly at his heart. "I told you," the rogue ninja whispered into his ear. His voice the last thing Naruto heard before the world dissolved into a tunnel of darkness. Predictable. Naruto fell, his body hitting the parched earth with a dull thud. He felt the life draining from him. A torrent of warmth that the Nine Tails chakra was desperately, uselessly, trying to plug. The wound was too severe. The blade's heat had cauterized everything it touched, sealing the pathways the fox's healing energy needed. From a distance, he heard Sakura scream his name. He saw Kakashi's one visible eye widen in horror. He saw Sasuke, frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Inside him, in the vast, echoing space of the seal, a different battle was raging. "Insolent whelp, you will not die here." The Nine Tails roared, its colossal form thrashing against the bars of its cage. It flooded Naruto's system with a tidal wave of demonic chakra, a red, corrosive power that fought against the encroaching death. But it wasn't working. The damage was too catastrophic. Death was a cold, black void. And it was pulling him under. The red chakra slammed against the edges of his soul, a desperate, blunt instrument. But as it did, it struck something else. Not the bars of the cage, but a deeper, more intricate part of the seal itself. It was a lock Minato had woven, a failsafe laced with Kushina's own unique chakra. A heritage he never knew he had. When the fox's raw, chaotic power hit that lock, it didn't break, it fractured, and from the cracks, something ancient and impossibly cold began to seep out. It was not the raging inferno of the fox. It was the silent, absolute cold of the void between stars. It was white, not red. It was serene, not furious. It was a power that did not seek to burn the world, but to freeze it in a state of perfect, crystalline stillness. "What is this?" the Kyuubi bellowed, recoiling as tendrils of pure white energy, colder than death itself, began to snake across the floor of the seal, encasing the sewer-like pipes in glittering hoarfrost. The crimson water began to freeze over, the ice spreading outwards from the gate. Naruto, a fading ember in the darkness, felt it. The searing pain in his chest vanished, replaced by a profound, spreading cold. It was not the cold of death. It was the cold of life. Of a winter forest, silent and waiting. Of the first snowflake touching warm skin. Outside, on the battlefield, the change was instantaneous and terrifying. The oppressive heat wave that had defined the battle simply vanished. The air grew still and cold. A collective gasp went through the remaining members of Team 7. Kagero, who had been about to retrieve his blade from Naruto's chest, stumbled back, his hand smoking as if burned. The body on the ground was glowing. It wasn't the angry, violent red of the Nine Tails. It was a soft, ethereal silver-white light, pulsing with a gentle rhythm. The ground around Naruto began to frost over, delicate, intricate patterns of ice spreading outwards in a perfect circle. The air itself began to crystallize. Tiny motes of ice catching the sunlight like a million scattered diamonds. Naruto's eyes snapped open. They were no longer the vibrant cerulean blue of the sky. They were the color of a frozen lake. A piercing, glacial blue that seemed to see not just the world, but the soul within it. His whisker marks, usually so prominent, seemed fainter, less defined. A single, shocking streak of pure white had appeared in his spiky, blonde hair, falling across his forehead like a sliver of moonlight. He sat up, his movements fluid and silent. The heated blade was still embedded in his chest. With a calm, detached motion, he gripped the hilt. There was no grimace of pain, no sound of exertion. He simply pulled. The metal screeched in protest as it was drawn from his body, and as it came free. It was no longer glowing. It was coated in a thick layer of frost. The wound, which should have been fatal, was closing. But it wasn't the Kyuubi's violent, steaming regeneration. White, frost-like energy knitted the flesh together, leaving behind no scar, only smooth, cold skin. Naruto rose to his feet. He was no longer the boy who had fallen. The frantic energy, the loud determination, the desperate anger, it was all gone. In its place was a stillness, a presence so powerful and so absolute that it commanded the attention of everyone on the battlefield. It was the calm at the eye of a blizzard. "That's impossible," Kagero stammered, taking an involuntary step back. The heat he commanded was his lifeblood, his weapon, his defense. But it was dissipating, leached off, by the impossible cold radiating from the boy. What are you? Naruto didn't answer. He simply tilted his head, his crystalline eyes locking onto the rogue ninja. He saw him then. Not the illusions, not the heat haze. He saw the man himself, the faint thrum of his chakra, the nervous beat of his heart, the heat signature of his real body standing 20 feet to the left of his most convincing mirage. It was all as clear as day. He raised a hand, palm open. The moisture in the air condensed, swirling towards his hand and freezing instantly. In seconds, he was holding a blade. It was a katana, forged from pure, translucent ice, shimmering with an inner light. It was a thing of impossible beauty and deadly purpose. He made that from nothing, Sakura whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. Sasuke stared, his Sharingan spinning. He saw it now, not as genjutsu, but as a different kind of energy. The boy's chakra network was wrong. The familiar blue pathways were overlaid with a second, silver-white network that pulsed with a cold, immense power. It dwarfed the Nine Tails reserves, making the tailed beast look like a candle next to a star. Naruto moved. He didn't run. He flowed. One moment he was standing over the circle of frost, the next he was in front of Kagero. There was no sound, no burst of speed. Just a seamless transition from one point to the next. Kagero reacted on pure instinct. Years of Anbu training taking over. He lashed out with his superheated kunai, aiming for the neck. Naruto's ice katana met the blow. There was no clang of metal on metal, only a soft hissing sound, like water on hot coals. The glowing kunai was instantly extinguished, its heat leached away in a fraction of a second. A web of frost spread from the point of impact, encasing Kagero's weapon in ice. The rogue ninja's eyes went wide with terror. He tried to pull back, but his kunai was frozen to the katana. Naruto twisted his wrist, the motion economical and precise. The kunai, now brittle from the extreme cold, shattered into 1,000 pieces. With his other hand, Naruto reached out and gently touched Kagero's shoulder. The man screamed. It was a high, thin sound of pure agony. A thick layer of frost exploded from the point of contact, racing across his body, encasing him in a prison of ice. It wasn't just on his skin. It was inside him, freezing the moisture in his cells, stopping the flow of his blood, silencing the frantic thrum of his chakra. In less than 3 seconds, Kagero was a statue of ice, his face a perfect mask of his final, terrified moments. Naruto lowered his hand. The ice katana in his other hand sublimated, turning from a solid blade into a cloud of glittering mist before vanishing completely. The silver-white aura around him receded, drawing back into his body. The world was silent. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the frozen statue, his expression unreadable. Then, he turned to face his team. Kakashi had his hand raised, ready for a fight, his expression grim. Sasuke was in a defensive stance, Chidori crackling in his palm, his face a mixture of shock and suspicion. Sakura was on the ground, her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide. They were looking at him like he was a monster. A stranger. Maybe he was. He felt the exhaustion then, a deep, bone-weary fatigue that went beyond the physical. The power, whatever it was, retreated deep inside him, leaving a quiet hum in its wake. His eyes flickered, the glacial blue softening back to their familiar cerulean. The white streak in his hair remained. He took a step towards them, and stumbled. His legs gave out from under him, and the world tilted sideways. Kakashi was there in an instant, catching him before he hit the ground. Naruto. Kakashi's voice was tense, cautious. "I'm okay, sensei," Naruto murmured, his voice hoarse. He looked at the frozen statue of their enemy. "Is it over?" "Yeah, Naruto," Kakashi said softly, his grip tightening. "It's over. You did it." Naruto didn't feel like he had done anything. It felt like someone else had worn his skin, moved his limbs, and ended the fight with a cold, terrifying efficiency he couldn't comprehend. As darkness finally claimed him, one thought echoed in his mind. What is happening to me? The Seraite, the fortified citadel of the Soul Reapers, was a place of eternal, unchanging order. Its white towers pierced a sky that was neither day nor night. Its streets were governed by laws as old as time itself. Sudden alarms were anathema to its very existence. Which was why the piercing shriek of emergency klaxon sent a tremor of unease through every Soul Reaper within its walls. In the barracks of the 13th Division, Rukia Kuchiki was in the middle of cleaning her Zanpakuto, Sota no Shirayuki. The ritual was a meditation for her, a moment of quiet focus. The alarm shattered it. She was on her feet instantly, her hand gripping the hilt of her sword, her eyes scanning for a threat. Oh, there members of her division were pouring out into the hallways, their faces etched with confusion and concern. What is it? A hollow invasion. It's coming from the 12th Division sector. Rukia didn't wait for orders. She moved, her flash step carrying her swiftly towards the source of the commotion. She arrived at the sprawling complex of the Seoul Society Research and Development Institute. To find it in a state of controlled chaos. Scientists in white coats were rushing back and forth, their voices overlapping in a frantic cacophony of technical jargon. In the center of the main observation room stood Captain Mayuri Kuretsuchi, his grotesque makeup a stark contrast to the sterile environment. He was staring, unblinking, at a massive spiritual energy monitor that was glowing a violent, angry red. Captain Kuretsuchi, Rukia said, her voice cutting through the noise. What's happened? Mayuri turned his head slowly, a predatory smile spreading across his face. It was a look that always unsettled her. Ah, Lieutenant Kuchiki, come to observe my latest triumph. Or perhaps the harbinger of our collective doom. The distinction is, as yet, unclear. He gestured a gloved hand towards the monitor. On it, a graph that should have been a relatively flat line was a jagged spike that went clear off the scale. An hour ago, our long-range spiritual particle detectors registered an event, Mayuri explained. His voice dripping with theatrical glee. Not in the human world as we know it. Not in Hawako Mundo. Not even in the farthest reaches of the Rukongai. This came from a place we have only theorized about. An insulated dimensional pocket. A world unto itself. Rukia stared at the screen. A new world. Perhaps. The energy signature is what's truly fascinating, Mayuri continued, his golden eyes gleaming. It flared into existence with the force of a supernova. For a moment, it eclipsed the spiritual pressure of the head captain himself. And the nature of the energy, it's utterly unique. It's not reishi. It's not ryutsu. It has properties of both, yet it is structured in a way I have never encountered. It's alive, for lack of a better word. A grim-faced messenger from the 1st Division arrived, his presence silencing the room. Captain Kuretsuchi, Lieutenant Kuchiki, the head captain summons you to the assembly hall. Immediately, the air in the 1st Division assembly hall was heavy and still. The captains of the Gote 13 stood in two neat lines, their faces impassive masks that betrayed nothing of their thoughts. At their head, seated with his ancient eyes closed, was head captain Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto. The spiritual pressure in the room was immense, a physical weight that would have crushed a lesser soul. Rukia knelt at the center of the room, her gaze fixed on the floor before her. The reports from the 12th Division are unprecedented, Yamamoto's voice boomed, echoing in the vast chamber. It was a voice that had commanded armies for 1,000 years. An energy source of immeasurable power has manifested in an uncharted realm. Its nature is unknown. Its intent is unknown. Such an anomaly cannot be ignored. He opened his eyes, and the temperature in the room seemed to rise by several degrees. His gaze fell upon Rukia. Rukia Kuchiki, he said. Her name, spoken by him, was a judgment. Your record is one of both distinction and complication. You have extensive experience operating alone in the human world. You are resourceful, cautious. Rukia's heart hammered in her chest. She knew what was coming. This mission requires a delicate touch, Yamamoto continued. We cannot send a full battalion crashing into a world we do not understand. We require an observer, someone to infiltrate, assess the nature of this power, identify its source, and determine if it is a threat to the balance of souls. His eyes narrowed. This mission is assigned to you. You will proceed to the designated coordinates provided by the 12th Division. You will observe. You will not engage unless absolutely necessary. You will report your findings directly to me. Is that understood? Yes, head captain, Rukia said, her voice clear and strong, betraying none of her inner turmoil. A solo mission into an unknown world. It was both a great honor and a potential death sentence. One more thing, Captain Rukia Kuchiki, her older brother, spoke for the first time. His voice was as cold and sharp as the winter wind. He stood impassively in his position as captain of the 6th Division, his gaze not on her, but on the head captain. If this entity proves hostile, she must have the authority to act. A mere observer will be useless against a power of this magnitude. Yamamoto considered this for a moment. Very well, you will be granted clearance for the full use of your abilities. But your primary objective remains observation. Do not mistake caution for weakness, but do not mistake recklessness for strength. The fate of more than one world may rest on your judgment. He paused, his ancient gaze sweeping over her one last time. You are dismissed. Prepare for your departure. Rukia bowed low, then rose and exited the hall, the heavy doors closing behind her. As she walked, she could feel her brother's cold, demanding eyes on her back. He had not spoken to her directly, but his message was clear: do not bring dishonor to the name of Kuchiki. Failure was not an option. Naruto awoke to the sterile white of a hospital ceiling. The smell of antiseptic was sharp and familiar. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then the memories came flooding back. The searing heat, the blade in his chest, the impossible cold. He sat up with a jolt. He wasn't in pain. He wasn't even sore. He felt clean, empty. He looked down at his chest, pulling aside the hospital gown. There was no scar, no mark, nothing to indicate he had been impaled only hours ago. He ran a hand through his hair. His fingers snagged on a lock that felt softer, silkier than the rest. He pulled it forward. A streak of pure, snow-white hair fell before his eyes. It was real. The door slid open. Tsunade entered, followed by Jiraiya and Kakashi. The looks on their faces were not of relief. They were grim, wary. Naruto, Tsunade said, her voice lacking its usual bluster. How are you feeling? Fine, he answered, and it was the truth. He felt more than fine. He felt calm. The constant, angry buzz of the Nine Tails chakra that had been his companion for as long as he could remember was muted, distant. It was still there, a caged beast in the back of his mind, but it was sullen and quiet. In its place was a serene, humming cold. What happened? You tell us, Jiraiya said, crossing his arms. His usual jovial demeanor was gone, replaced by the hardened gaze of the Sannin. Your chakra signature changed completely. We've never seen anything like it. It wasn't the fox. I don't know, Naruto said honestly. I was dying. And then, something else woke up. Tsunade stepped forward, her eyes, the eyes of the world's greatest medical ninja, scanning every inch of him. I've run every diagnostic I can think of. Your cells are vibrating at a different frequency. Your chakra pathways are overlaid. There's a second network of energy in your body, something cold and incredibly potent. It healed you, Naruto. It rewrote the damage on a cellular level. He looked at his hands. They felt like his own, but also strangely new. He could feel the power humming beneath his skin, patient and waiting. This power, Kakashi spoke up, leaning against the doorframe. You controlled it perfectly. You created a weapon out of thin air and defeated a Jonin-level opponent in seconds, without any collateral damage. That's not your style, Naruto. The words weren't an accusation. But they felt like one. You're different. You're not the Naruto we know. The statue has been moved to the T&I department, Tsunade said. Ibiki's men are trying to figure out how to thaw him without killing him. The ice your ability generated is unlike any normal ice. It seems to nullify chakra. Naruto didn't know what to say. He felt like a stranger in his own body. He had saved them, won the mission. But he had terrified them in the process. He had terrified himself. For now, you're confined to the village, Tsunade declared, her tone final. You're not to go any missions until we understand what this new power is and whether you can control it. He just nodded, his gaze distant. Control it. He hadn't controlled anything. He had been a passenger. Later that night, unable to sleep, he slipped out of the hospital. The guards at the entrance were Jonin, but they might as well have been children. He moved through the shadows with an instinct he didn't know he possessed. His footsteps making no sound. The new energy inside him seemed to guide him, to cloak him from prying eyes. He found himself standing atop the Hokage monument, on his father's head. The village spread out below him. A sea of lights under the full moon. It was peaceful. For the first time, He felt like he could appreciate the quiet. The usual loneliness he felt in moments like this was absent, replaced by a sense of profound self-containment. He wasn't lonely, he was alone. And it was okay. He felt the presence a split second before she appeared. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a flicker of movement. It was a pressure, a disturbance in the spiritual fabric of the world that his new senses registered as clearly as a shout. He turned slowly. A girl stood there, not 10 feet away. She was short, with large, expressive violet eyes and neat, black hair. She wore a strange black kimono with a white sash, and carried a sword at her hip. But it was her energy that held his attention. It was clean, sharp, and powerful. Like a well-honed blade. She was not of this world. Rukia Kuchiki stood silently, her hand resting on the hilt of Soda no Shirayuki. She had been tracking the spiritual signature for the past hour. And it had led her here. To this boy, she had expected a monster. A raging beast of pure, untamed power. She found this instead. A young man, no older than her in appearance, with blonde hair. A streak of white, and the calmest, most ancient eyes she had ever seen. The power radiating from him wasn't chaotic or malevolent. It was vast, controlled, and as cold as the Zanpakuto she carried. It was a sleeping glacier, a silent winter storm. This boy was the source. They stared at each other for a long, unbroken moment under the light of the moon. No words were exchanged. There was no need. In the silent language of souls, a conversation was already taking place. Rukia saw a being of immense, unknown power, a puzzle that defied every law of the soul society she had ever known. Naruto saw a warrior, a woman of duty and strength, a visitor from a world beyond his comprehension who looked at him not with fear or suspicion, but with a cautious, calculating curiosity. The wind picked up, swirling around the monument, carrying with it the promise of a coming storm. The silence stretched, a taut wire between two worlds, two souls, who had just collided with the force of destiny. And in that silence, a story began. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A Dance of Blades and Souls. The silence on the stone face was a living thing, heavy and charged. Naruto watched the girl, this strange visitor in black, and felt the hum of his own power resonate with hers. It was like two tuning forks struck to the same, impossible note. She was a predator, her stillness coiled and ready. He was a force of nature, his calm the deceptive surface of a deep, frozen ocean. Rukia broke the stillness first. Her movement was a whisper of displaced air. She didn't draw her sword. Instead, she raised her right hand. Index finger pointed at him. Bakuto the first. Sigh, she incanted, her voice crisp and authoritative. Invisible spiritual ropes shot forward, aiming to bind Naruto's arms to his sides. It was a simple, effective restraining spell, meant to test his nature and immobilize him without injury. To a normal human, it would be inescapable. Naruto didn't try to dodge. He didn't need to. The moment the unseen energy made contact, a filigree of frost bloomed across his shirt and arms. The spiritual ropes, which should have locked tight, became brittle and fragile upon touching the intense cold emanating from his body. They shattered with a faint, crystalline chime, dissolving into harmless motes of light. Rukia's violet eyes widened slightly. A low-level binding spell, yes, but it should have held. For it to be nullified so passively spoke of an immense and unusual defensive energy. She shifted her stance, dropping lower. If you won't be contained, she stated, her voice losing its questioning tone and gaining a hard edge, then you will be disarmed. She moved, and this time it was with the breathtaking speed of a soul reaper's flash step. She was a black blur, closing the distance in a fraction of a heartbeat, her hand reaching for his shoulder. Her plan was simple. Apply a precise spiritual shock to his pressure points, incapacitating him. But Naruto's new senses didn't track her speed. They tracked the flow of her energy. To him, she was a comet of violet light arcing through the darkness, and he could see its trajectory perfectly. He took a single, fluid step to the side. Her hand, aimed for his shoulder, swiped through empty air. The surprise on her face was clear as she tried to pivot, her momentum carrying her past him. He didn't counterattack. He simply raised his hand and a thin, slick sheet of ice spread across the stone where she was about to plant her foot. Her sandal, designed for sure footing, found none. She slipped, her PR. Actic grace broken for a split second as she fought to regain her balance. It was all the time he needed. He didn't press the advantage. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets now, his glacia. Blue eyes watching her with an unnerving placidity. "You're fast," he said, his voice a low murmur that carried easily on the wind. "But you're loud." Rukia straightened up, her expression a mixture of irritation and grudging respect. "Loud? I made no sound. Your energy did," Naruto replied simply. "It screams." That gave her pause. He could perceive spirit energy not just as a presence, but as a sound. What was he? She decided a more direct approach was necessary. Her hand went to the hilt of her white katana. The air around her grew colder, though it was a familiar, sharp chill, nothing like the absolute cold that radiated from the boy. "I am a soul reaper of the Gote 13, she announced, her voice ringing with the weight of her title. "I am here to investigate a spiritual anomaly that threatens the balance of worlds. You are that anomaly. Identify yourself and the nature of your power." "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he answered, his gaze unwavering. "And this is my home. You're the one trespassing, so you can start by telling me what a soul reaper is before you start making demands." His lack of fear, his complete refusal to be intimidated, was more unsettling than any display of aggression would have been. He wasn't acting like a mindless monster. He was acting like someone who held all the cards. "You are in no position to ask questions," Rukia said, drawing Soda no Shirayuki. The blade was a pristine, beautiful white, and the air around it seemed to shimmer. "Submit for judgment." She lunged, not with a simple burst of speed, but with a series of coordinated flash steps, creating after images to confuse her target. One Rukia charged from the front, another from the left, a third from the right. It was a classic Shinigami technique. Naruto didn't even look at the after images. His eyes remained locked on the true Rukia, the one whose, screaming, energy was a beacon in the night. As she brought her blade down in a shimmering arc aimed to disable, not kill, he acted. He didn't summon a weapon. He simply raised his forearm. A thick, curved bracer of translucent, diamond-hard ice formed instantly, wrapping around his arm from wrist to elbow. Clang! The sound was shockingly loud in the night air. Rukia's Zanpakuto, a blade that could cleave the soul of a hollow, struck the ice bracer and stopped dead. The impact sent a jarring shock up her arm. A web of cracks appeared on the ice. But it held. "My turn," Naruto said, his voice still calm. He pushed forward, shattering the bracer into a cloud of icy shards. The move forced her back, creating space. He stamped his foot on the stone ground. Rukia felt the chill a moment before she saw it. Spikes of jagged, cruel-looking ice erupted from the ground, chasing her like hounds. They didn't just rise, they lunged, following her movements, forcing her to leap and weave through the air with a series of desperate flash steps. This was no mere elemental jutsu. The ice was imbued with his energy, it was an extension of his will. She landed on the carved hair of the fourth Hokage, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. This was escalating far too quickly. His control was absolute, his power immense. "Hado the 33, Sokatsui," she chanted, thrusting her palm forward. A massive torrent of blue spiritual energy erupted from her hand, a roaring cannonball of destructive force aimed directly at Naruto. It was one of her most powerful offensive spells, more than enough to level a building. Naruto watched the azure blast approach. He didn't move to evade it. He simply raised his right hand, his palm open, as if to catch it. A whirlwind of snow and freezing air materialized in front of him, swirling into a dense, rapidly spinning shield. The Sokatsui slammed into the vortex of ice. There was no explosion. The roaring energy of the spell was muffled, devoured. The vortex spun faster, the blue light of Rukia's attack being drawn into its center and extinguished, the entire blast of energy seemingly absorbed and neutralized by the extreme cold. When the vortex dissipated a second later, Naruto was standing untouched, a fine layer of frost covering the ground at his feet. Rukia stared in utter disbelief. He had consumed her Hado spell. Not blocked it, not deflected it, he had eaten it. "Is that all?" Naruto asked, a hint of something, not arrogance, but genuine curiosity, in his tone. Before Rukia could process an answer, they were no longer alone. In a series of silent flashes, a dozen figures appeared on the monument, surrounding them. Anbu. Their blank, animal-styled maw, SKS and drawn tantos created a ring of deadly intent. A moment later, Kakashi shimmered into existence between Naruto and Rukia, his one visible eye narrowed, the Sharingan already spinning. Naruto. Get back, Kakashi commanded, his hand crackling with the barely restrained lightning of his Reikiri. Who is this? Stay out of this, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that made the veteran ninja pause. He hadn't shouted. He had stated a fact. Rukia was now in an even worse position. Surrounded by unknown warriors emanating a strange, wild energy she identified as chakra. And facing a man whose left eye pulsed with a power that made her skin crawl. Her mission was to observe, not to incite an international incident with a previously unknown dimension of warrior monks. I am a soul reaper, she said again, her eyes darting between Kakashi and the silent Anbu. My presence here is by the decree of the Soul King. This boy is a source of immense spiritual imbalance. He must be investigated. He is a shinobi of Konoha, Kakashi countered, his voice dangerously low. And he is under my protection. You are the intruder here. The tension ratcheted up, he air crackling with three different kinds of power. Rukia's refined Ryutsu, Kakashi's sharp chakra, and the overwhelming, cold presence of Naruto. Naruto took a step forward, placing himself slightly in front of Kakashi. A subtle gesture that shifted the entire dynamic. He was no longer the one being protected. He was taking control. She's not a threat, Naruto said, his gaze fixed on Rukia. Not yet, anyway. Her energy is disciplined. She's a soldier, not a monster. He then looked at Kakashi. Stand down, all of you. This is my business. The Anbu captain, a man with a weasel mask, looked to Kakashi for confirmation. Kakashi hesitated, his mind racing. This was not the Naruto he knew. The loudmouthed, impulsive boy he'd mentored was gone. This Naruto was decisive, perceptive, and rad, adding a confidence that bordered on absolute. For him to assess the situation and give a direct order with such clarity, Kakashi made a split-second decision. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The Anbu relaxed their stances, though their blades remained drawn. Naruto turned his full attention back to Rukia. You want to investigate me? Fine. I want to know what you are and where you come from. We can do this the hard way. He gestured to the frozen ground and the stunned Anbu, or we can talk. Your choice. Rukia looked from Naruto's chillingly calm face to the wary shinobi surrounding her. Her mission was to gather intelligence. A direct battle against this boy and what was clearly his entire village's elite guard would be suicidal and counterproductive. He was offering her exactly what she came for, albeit on his terms. Sheathing Soda no Shirayuki was an admission that she could not win, a blow to her pride. But pride was secondary to duty. With a sharp, clean motion, she slid her Zanpakuto back into its scabbard. Talk, she said, her voice tight. I will talk. The Hokage's office was suffocatingly tense. Tsunade sat behind her desk, her fingers steepled, her knuckles white. Jiraiya stood by the window, his arms crossed, his usual leer replaced by a grim scowl. Kakashi stood near the door, a silent sentinel. In the center of the room stood Naruto and Rukia. The initial hostility had cooled into a wary truce. Rukia, with a stoicism born of her noble upbringing and Soul Reaper training, had succinctly explained the basics. She spoke of the Soul Society, a realm of spirits. Of Soul Reapers who guided souls and maintained balance. Of hollows, monstrous souls who devoured others. And she explained that an eruption of spiritual power, Ryutsu, she called it, of an unknown type and unprecedented magnitude had emanated from this location. From him. So you're saying, Tsunade said, her voice dangerously level, that Naruto is now some kind of beacon attracting the attention of other worlds. That is the simplest way to describe it. Yes, Rukia answered, her posture ramrod straight. My mission is to understand the nature of this power. Is it stable? Is its wielder in control? Is it a threat to the balance my people have sworn to protect? He's in control, Kakashi interjected. You saw it yourself. His precision was remarkable. Jiraiya turned from the window. This power, you said it's not Ryutsu. What is it? I do not know, Rukia admitted. It feels primordial. It has the density of spiritual pressure, but it behaves like the energy you call chakra. It is a fusion of some kind. An impossibility. All eyes turned to Naruto, who had been silent throughout the entire exchange, simply listening. He met their gazes without flinching. "It's mine," he said. "That's all you need to know." Tsunade slammed her hand on the desk, not in anger, but in frustration. "That's not good enough, Naruto. An unknown power awakens in you, a strang. From another dimension appears in our village. This is a matter of Konoha's security. And I handled it," Naruto countered, his voice still even. "She's not an enemy. She's an investigator. Letting her do her job is the fastest way to get answers and make sure more of her friends don't show up with their swords drawn." Jiraiya stroked his chin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "The kid has a point. A direct confrontation is foolish. We know nothing about this Soul Society. If she's here to observe, maybe we should let her." Tsunade glared at him, then back at Rukia. The gears of her mind were turning, calculating risks and opportunities. A direct link to another world, to a military organization of soul warriors, the intelligence potential was enormous. But the danger was equally so. "Fine," Tsunade said, her decision made. "Here's the deal. You," she pointed a finger at Rukia, "can stay in Konoha. You will be assigned quarters and a cover identity. You can observe Naruto, but you will be monitored at all times. And in exchange, you will answer our questions. Everything you know about your world, your powers, and any potential threats that might be drawn to Naruto." Rukia considered the terms. It was a compromise. She would be a guest, but also a prisoner. Still, it gave her exactly what her mission required: proximity to the target. "I accept these terms." "Good," Tsunade grunted. She looked at Kakashi. "He's your responsibility. Find a place for her. And Naruto," her gaze softened for a fraction of a second, "don't cause an interdimensional war before breakfast." Deep beneath the village, in the most secure section of the Torture and Interrogation Force headquarters, the statue of Kagero stood in a sealed, climate-controlled room. Two of Ibiki's most trusted men stood guard outside the reinforced door. Inside, the only sound was the low hum of the refrigeration unit. The ice encasing the rogue ninja was perfect, clear as glass. His expression of terror was frozen for eternity. Or so they thought. Unseen by any eye, deep within the frozen heart of the statue, a flicker of something dark and oily pulsed. It was a sliver of Kageyama's corrupted energy, a parasitic spore left behind by his agents. Designed to gather information, Naruto's absolute zero frost had neutralized Kagero's chakra and frozen his body, but this alien energy was different. It fed not on heat, but on despair, on ambition, and Kagero's frozen soul was screaming with both. The dark energy pulsed again, a silent beat. On the surface of the ice, near the base, a microscopic crack, no wider than a human hair, appeared. It was small, insignificant, but it was a start. The prison was not as perfect as its creator believed. Kakashi led Rukia to a small, unremarkable apartment not far from Naruto's own. It was simple, furnished with the bare essentials. "This will be your residence," he said, his tone professional but laced with a clear warning. "You are not to leave without an escort. For your safety, and ours." "I understand," Rukia said, her eyes sweeping the room. It was humble, a far cry from the sparse elegance of her family's estate. Naruto had followed them, lingering in the doorway. The tension from their earlier fight had evaporated, replaced by a strange, awkward curiosity. "So," he said, breaking the silence. "A soul reaper, huh? You guys fight ghosts for a living?" Rukia turned to him, her expression severe. "We are Shinigami. We guide the souls of the dead to the afterlife and maintain the balance. It is a sacred duty, not fighting ghosts." "Right, sacred duty," Naruto nodded slowly, as if processing the concept. He leaned against the doorframe. "Well, Shinigami-san, welcome to Konoha. Try not to get into any more fights on my dad's head." The old man gets cranky. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was the first hint of the boy he used to be, a flicker of warmth in the cool calm he now projected. Rukia just stared at him. Shish. He had come here expecting to find a chaotic, rampaging monster. Instead, she'd found a warrior with the power of a natural disaster and the composure of a seasoned commander. He was an enigma, a walking contradiction of immense power and surprising gentleness. Her mission, she realized, was going to be far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The two of them stood there in the quiet apartment, the shinobi and the Soul Reaper. Two impossibilities from different worlds, now inextricably linked. The dance of blades had ended. A new, more intricate dance was just beginning. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Shadows. The days in Konoha settled into a strange new rhythm, a quiet hum of tension and curiosity. Rukia Kuchiki, the interdimensional investigator, was now Ruki-chan, a supposed distant cousin of the Hyuga clan's branch family, sent to Konoha for specialized training. The cover story was thin, barely enough to satisfy civilian scrutiny, but among the shinobi, the truth was an open secret. She was the Soul Reaper, the woman in black, and she was never far from Naruto Uzumaki. Their observation became a daily ritual. They met in Training Ground 7, the same place. Ace Team 7 had first learned the sting of failure and the strength of teamwork. But the dynamic was entirely different. This was not a teacher and a student. It was a meeting of equals, two masters of radically different arts, trying to understand one another. Your stance is all wrong, Rukia criticized, her wooden bakken held perfectly before her. You fight like a brawler. All your power comes from your legs and your core. But your upper body is just along for the ride. You leave yourself wide open. Naruto, holding a similar wooden sword, just grinned. Works for me. He lunged, not with the grace of a swordsman, but with the explosive, unpredictable speed of a ninja. He didn't try to meet her blade with his. He feinted, dropped low, and swept his bakken at her ankles. It was a dirty, effective move. Rukia didn't fall for it. She performed a small, precise leap, the wooden blade whistling harmlessly under her feet. As she landed, she brought the hilt of her own sword down in a sharp, punishing blow aimed at the back of his neck. A flicker of movement, a cloud of displaced leaves. The Naruto she'd struck dissolved into smoke. A clone. The real Naruto was behind her, his own bakken resting gently against her throat. Too slow, he murmured, his breath warm near her ear. She didn't flinch. Instead, she let her own bakken fall from her hand. In the same motion, her fingers snapped into a complex seal. Bakudo the 61st. Raikujokuro. 6 wide beams of yellow light materialized in the air around Naruto, slamming into his midsection and pinning him in place, his arms locked to his sides. He grunted, surprised by the speed and power of the spell. Rukia stepped away, retrieving her weapon. A small, smug smile touched her lips. As I said, wide open. You rely on tricks and overwhelming force. A disciplined opponent will always find an opening. Naruto strained against the light cuffs for a moment, then stopped. A thin sheen of frost spread across the yellow energy constructs. The light flickered, sputtered, and then the entire binding spell shattered into a shower of golden dust. He rolled his shoulders, unaffected. And a disciplined opponent will always expect the fight to follow the rules. He countered, pointing his bakken at her. I make my own. This was their dance. She would try to teach him the refined elegance of Zanjutsu, the art of the sword, and the precise logic of Kido. He, in turn, showed her the chaotic, brutally efficient world of the shinobi. He taught her how to read the subtle tells of a feint, how to use the environment as a weapon, and the sheer, unadulterated value of being unpredictable. They learned from each other. Rukia found herself incorporating feints and sudden changes in elevation into her flash steps, making her movements far harder to track. Naruto, under her reluctant tutelage, began to move with more purpose, conserving his energy, his brawling style slowly gaining a terrifying, underlying structure. The professional respect was cementing into something more. They would often end their sessions sitting on the grass, sharing rice balls from a bento box Sakura had packed for Naruto, a peace offering that ALS.O served as her way of keeping tabs on the strange girl. So your brother is a captain? Naruto asked one afternoon, munching on a rice ball. Is he as stuck up as you? Rukia bristled, swallowing her food before she replied. My brother, Rukia Kuchiki, is the head of the 28th generation of the Kuchiki clan, one of the 4 great noble families. He is a man who embodies the law and order of the Soul Society. His dignity is a reflection of his immense responsibility. You would be wise not to speak of him so lightly. So, yeah, Naruto said with a nod. Stuck up. Got it. She shot him a glare, but there was no heat in it. She found his complete lack of reverence for titles and status refreshing. In the Seraite, her name defined her. She was a Kuchiki first, a Soul Reaper second, and Rukia a distant third. To Naruto, she was just Rukia, the girl who fought with a cool sword and knew a lot of fancy magic words. And your family? She asked, turning the question back on him. You mentioned your father being on that monument. Naruto's easy smile faded slightly. He looked up at the stone faces carved into the mountain. Yeah, that's him. The fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze. The guy who saved the village and died doing it. He said it so casually, but Rukia heard the lifetime of loneliness packed into that single sentence. An orphan, just like her. But while she had been adopted into nobility, he had been left to fend for himself, a pariah carrying a burden he hadn't chosen. Her own guarded childhood suddenly seemed like a luxury. He would be proud of you, she said softly, the words leaving her lips before she'd thought them through. Naruto looked at her, his glacial blue eyes softening. For a moment, he looked less like a force of nature and more like a boy who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders for too long. Yeah, he said, his voice quiet. Maybe. It was in these quiet moments that the true connection formed. It wasn't in the clash of their training, but in the shared silence afterward. A bond forged not in power, but in a mutual understanding of duty and a shared, unspoken loneliness. The whispers began a week later. They started in the Konoha hospital. A patient, a young Chunin who had died from complications during surgery, was seen walking the hallways 2 nights after his death. His form was hazy, translucent, and he moved with a disturbing, disjointed gait, muttering the names of the doctors who had failed to save him. Then, a merchant in the market district passed from a heart attack. The next day, his spectral form was seen hovering over his stall, his ethereal hands rearranging his wares with a frantic, obsessive energy. His cries of anguish were silent, but they chilled anyone who passed by. These were pluses, souls of the dead who lingered in the world of the living due to strong attachments. Rukia explained that it was a Soul Reaper's duty to perform Kanso, a soul burial, using the hilt of their Zanpaku, to tap the spirit on the forehead and send them peacefully to the Soul Society. But these were different. They found their first real case near the Naka River. An elderly woman who had passed away in her sleep was now a terrifying sight. Her spirit was no longer human-shaped. It was twisted, its form elongated and malformed, its face a mask of rage. A dark, oily chakra, similar to the faint traces they'd felt at the other sightings, clung to it like a shroud, corrupting its very essence. It was lashing out, its spiritual energy causing the water in the river to churn and bubble violently. This isn't a normal plus, Rukia said, her hand already on Soda no Shirayuki's hilt. Something is tainting it, corrupting it. It's becoming something like a hollow. It's chakra, Naruto said, his eyes narrowed. His new senses could differentiate the energies with perfect clarity. It's not the woman's. It's foreign. It's parasitic. It's feeding on her regret. The spirit let out a silent, horrifying shriek and lunged at them, its wispy claws swiping at their faces. Rukia moved to intercept it, her blade drawn. I have to purify it. It's the only way. Wait, Naruto commanded, stepping in front of her. He looked at the contorted face of the spirit, at the flicker of confused sadness behind the rage. This was a Konoha citizen. Someone's grandmother. There is no time, Naruto. Rukia insisted, trying to push past him. If that corruption takes hold completely, it will become a true monster. It is a mercy to end its suffering now. I'm not going to cut down an old lady, ghost or not. He shot back, his jaw set. There has to be another way. He remembered her words. Its attachments and corruption are twisting it. The problem wasn't the soul itself, it was the foul energy clinging to it. Maybe he didn't have to destroy the whole thing. Maybe he could just remove the bad part. The corrupted spirit gathered its energy, the dark chakra swirling around it as it prepared another attack. Rukia, buy me some time, Naruto said, his tone shifting from defiant to focused. Just keep it off me. She hesitated for a split second, her training screaming at her that this was wrong, that he was being naive. But the look in his eyes, the absolute conviction, made her move. Fine, but if it gets too dangerous, I'm ending this. She engaged the spirit, her white blade a blur. She didn't strike to kill, but to parry. To redirect, her movements a beautiful, dangerous dance designed to contain the raging soul without destroying it. Naruto closed his eyes, ignoring the fight raging just feet away from him. He focused inward, reaching for the serene, cold power within him. He didn't want the destructive force he'd used on Kagero. He needed something else, something precise. He imagined the cold knot as a weapon. But as a tool, like a surgeon's scalpel, he opened his eyes, the glacial blue glowing with a soft inner light. He extended his hands towards the battling spirits. What are you doing? Rukia grunted, narrowly dodging a swipe that would have torn her own soul from her body. Surgery, Naruto replied. He didn't unleash a blizzard or a spike of ice. Instead, a fine, shimmering mist of absolute zero particles flowed from his palms. It wasn't aggressive. It moved slowly, gently, like fog rolling in from the sea. The mist enveloped the corrupted spirit. The spirit began to slow, its frantic movements becoming sluggish. The dark, oily chakra clinging to it began to stiffen, to freeze. Naruto focused, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was separating the two energies molecule by molecule, using the intense cold to create a barrier between the pure soul and its parasitic corruption. It was like trying to peel the paint off a canvas without damaging the art beneath. The spirit let out one last, agonizing wail as Naruto pushed, forcing the freezing mist to contract. The dark, oily chakra, now frozen solid, cracked and flaked away from the translucent form of the soul, falling to the ground and sublimating into nothingness. What was left was the simple, translucent form of an old woman. The rage was gone, replaced by a look of profound confusion and peace. She looked at her hands, then at Naruto, and gave him a gentle, grateful smile before her form began to fade. Now, Rukia, Naruto said, his voice strained from the effort. Rukia stared, utterly speechless for a moment. He had done it. He hadn't destroyed the soul, he had healed it. He had performed a feat of spiritual purification she had never heard of, never even conceived of. Shaking herself from her stupor, she quickly moved forward and gently tapped the forehead of the fading spirit with the pommel of her zanpakuto. A soft blue glow enveloped the old woman, and with a final, peaceful sigh, her soul passed on. Naruto slumped to his knees, breathing heavily. The precision required for that move had taken more out of him than any brawl ever had. Rukia sheathed her sword and knelt beside him, placing a hesitant hand on his shoulder. I have never seen anything like that, she said, her voice filled with a genuine awe that transcended their usual banter. The laws of the soul society say that a corrupted soul must be cleansed by the blade. You showed me another way. Naruto looked up at her, a tired but triumphant smile on his face. Told you, I make my own rules. In that moment, looking at him, Rukia felt a powerful, undeniable shift in her own soul. Her respect for him as a warrior was eclipsed by a deep admiration for the man he was. His stubborn refusal to accept the world as it was. His unwavering belief in finding a better way, it was the most powerful force she had ever encountered. Miles away, in a cavern hidden deep within the mountains that bordered the land of fire, a figure knelt before a throne of jagged, black rock. Lord Kageyama, the agent, a man with the spiritual signature of a lesser Arankar, reported. The test was a success. The target's power is exactly as you predicted. A fusion of energies. He was able to separate the corrupted chakra from the host soul without destroying it. Upon the throne, Kageyama smiled. He was a tall, elegant man who looked more like a disgraced scholar than a would-be god. Fascinating. He doesn't use his power merely to destroy. He uses it to edit reality. The perfect tool. He rose from his throne, walking towards a shimmering portal that showed a distorted, real-time image of Konoha. He believes he is a savior, Kageyama mused, his voice smooth as silk. He protects the status quo, the flawed world that created him. He doesn't yet see the truth. That to truly save the world, you must first break it. You must burn away the imperfections and forge it anew in a fire of absolute order. He looked back at his agent. The girl, the Soul Reaper. Does she remain with him? Constantly, my lord, she is his shadow. Good, Kageyama said, a predatory light in his eyes. Every great man has a weakness. A focal point for their morality. A person they would tear the world apart to protect. Let them grow close. Let them build their little bridge between worlds. When the time is right, we will use that bridge to march our army across. And we will use his heart to burn it all to the ground. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Unseen Enemy. The air in the dango shop was warm and sweet, AFR. Agile pocket of peace in a world growing steadily more complex. Naruto sat across from Rukia, a half-eaten skewer in his hand, watching her with an amused expression. She was meticulously dissecting her own dango with the tip of her skewer. Her brow furrowed in concentration as if she were defusing a bomb. You know, he said, breaking the comfortable silence, you're supposed to just eat it. Rukia looked up, a faint pink dusting her cheeks. It is illogical. 3 distinct spheres of confection, yet they are served on a single implement. It creates a logistical dilemma regarding the optimal sequence of consumption. Naruto laughed, a genuine, unforced sound that had become more common in her presence. You think way too much. Just start at the top and work your way down. It's not a strategic exercise. Everything is a strategic exercise, she retorted, but there was a playful light in her violet eyes. The stiff, duty-bound Soul Reaper was slowly being chipped away, revealing the wry, thoughtful woman beneath. She had become a familiar, if strange, presence in the village. Her cover as a Hyuga cousin was mostly for show, the shinobi knew who and what she was. They watched her with a mixture of suspicion and respect, especially after reports of her and Naruto handling the spirit problem had circulated through the Jonin ranks. They were an oddity, the Jinchuriki with the Po.R of winter and the death god from another world. A hell butterfly, a creature of exquisite, dark beauty, fluttered into the shop, unnoticed by the civilian patrons. It landed gently on Rukia's outstretched finger. Its wings beating silently. Naruto watched, his senses telling him the creature was made of pure spirit energy. It whispered a message only she could hear, its voice a telepathic murmur in her mind. Report from the 12th Division. Multiple hostile spiritual signatures detected crossing the dimensional boundary. High energy. Non-hollow. Orders are to maintain your position, observe, and do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. Await further instructions. Rukia's expression hardened, the brief moment of peace shattered. She stood up abruptly. Naruto, we have to go. What is it? He asked, his own demeanor shifting instantly, the easygoing boy replaced by the focused warrior. Trouble, she said, her voice grim. Multiple hostiles. The same energy as the corrupted spirits, but much, much stronger. Before she could finish the sentence, the world exploded. The blast came from the direction of the village's main gate. A pillar of sickly purple energy erupted into the sky, followed by a concussive boom that shattered windows for 3 blocks. Screams tore through the afternoon calm. Instantly, alarms began to blare across the village. Naruto and Rukia were already moving, a blur of orange and black, flowing through the panicked crowds. They didn't need orders. They didn't need a plan. They moved towards the chaos. The scene at the gate was one of carnage. A significant portion of the massive wall had been blasted inward. The Chunin guards who had been on duty were gone, their bodies vaporized. In their place stood a dozen figures. They weren't quite human. Their skin was unnaturally pale, and their bodies were adorned with fragments of white, bone-like armor. Each of them had a gaping hole somewhere in their body, a signature mark Naruto's senses screamed was unnatural. But they weren't the mindless beasts Rukia had described as hollows. They moved with discipline, forming a defensive perimeter, their hands crackling with a dark, corrupting chakra. Arankar, Rukia breathed, her hand gripping the hilt of her Zanpakuto. Hollows who have removed their masks to gain the powers of a Soul Reaper. But the energy, it's been mixed with that foul chakra. This is Kageyama's work. From the rooftops, shinobi began to appear. Asuma Sarutobi and Kurenai Yuhi landed nearby, their expressions grim. What in the hell are those things? Asuma growled, trench knives already gleaming in his hands. The enemy, Naruto said simply, his glacial eyes scanning the battlefield. He could see it all, not just the Arankar at the gate, but other, smaller pockets of The same energy flaring to life all over the village. The hospital, the archives, the academy. This wasn't a random assault. It was a coordinated, tactical strike. It's a diversion, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the rising panic. They're hitting key targets simultaneously to split our forces. As if on cue, another explosion rocked the village, this one from the direction of the Hokage Tower. Asuma-sensei, Kurenai-sensei. Naruto's voice took on a sharp, commanding tone that made the veteran Jonin turn to him instinctively. Take your teams, secure the Hokage Tower. Shikamaru and the others should be responding there. We need to consolidate our leadership. Asuma hesitated for a fraction of a second, surprised by the authority in Naruto's voice, but the logic was sound. He nodded sharply. Got it. What about you? We'll hold the gate, Naruto said, his gaze locked on the Arankar. We'll keep the main force from advancing. Asuma and Kurenai vanished in a flicker of movement. Naruto turned to Rukia, ready for a real dance. She gave him a sharp, confident grin, drawing Soda no Shirayuki. The blade gleamed a brilliant white. Try to keep up. They charged. Naruto didn't lead with a Rasengan. He slammed his palms on the ground. A massive, 10-foot-tall wall of opaque, reinforced ice erupted from the earth, splitting the street in two. It wasn't just a barrier, it was a tactical maneuver, funneling the Arankar into a narrower channel and protecting the fleeing civilians behind them. First dance. Tsukishiro, Rukia incanted, her blade tracing a perfect circle. A column of brilliant white light shot up from the circle, flash freezing the two lead Arankar solid. Before their frozen forms could even begin to fall, Naruto was past them. He moved with a chilling economy of motion. He didn't use clones or flashy jutsu. He became a phantom of ice and speed. An Arankar fired a Sero, a blast of concentrated spiritual energy, from its fist. Naruto didn't dodge. He created a small, concave lens of ice in the air in front of him. The Sero hit the lens, and its energy was instantly refracted, bending the beam of destruction harmlessly into the sky. He closed the distance, his hand glowing with a pale blue light. He didn't strike the Arankar's body. He tapped its bone-like mask. The effect was instantaneous. The mask was flash-frozen, the extreme cold spree, adding through the creature's spiritual body like a virus. It screamed, a horrifying, grating sound, as its own energy was frozen solid from the inside out. It crumbled into a heap of frozen dust. Rukia moved in perfect sync with him. She was a whirlwind of white cloth and gleaming steel. Where Naruto's power was absolute zero, a force of stillness, hers was a dance of beautiful, deadly frost. Second dance. Hakuren, she called out, thrusting her sword forward. A massive wave of pure white spiritual energy, an avalanche of snow and ice, roared down the street, slamming into a group of 4 Arankar and sending them tumbling back. Their bodies encased in thick rime. Their teamwork was seamless, instinctive. He controlled the battlefield, shaping it with walls and shields of ice. She was the striking force. Her blade and Kido spells picking off the enemies he isolated. They were 2 halves of a winter storm, a symphony of ice and soul. From a rooftop overlooking the main gate, a new figure watched. He was taller than the other Arankar, clad in a more ornate, form-fitting uniform. His mask fragment resembled the jaw of a serpent, and his eyes held a cold, analytical intelligence. This was Riker, one of Kageyama's chief lieutenants. Incredible, Riker mused to himself, his voice a low hiss. The boy's control over that energy, it's not raw power. It's an art form. And the soul, Reaper's abilities complement his perfectly. Lord Kageyama was right. This is the key. He raised a hand. Phase 2. Draw them out. Separate them. Down on the street, half the remaining Arankar suddenly broke formation. 4 of them leapt onto the rooftops and began racing towards the hospital. Damn it, Naruto cursed. He knew Tsunade and Shizune were there, but the hospital was full of the wounded and helpless. It was the village's softest target. I'll go, Rukia said immediately. No, Naruto countered, his eyes narrowed in calculation. That's what they want, to split us up. We go together. He placed 2 fingers on the ground, channeling his sensory ability. He could feel the flow of energy throughout the village, the hotspots of conflict. The main force was still here at the gate, held back by his ice wall. But the smaller squads were causing chaos. We can't be everywhere at once, Rukia argued, deflecting a blast of energy from a recovering Arankar. A hell butterfly appeared, fluttering frantically around her head. It was a new message, its voice filled with the urgency of a direct order from the Captain Commander himself. Lieutenant Kuchiki, the situation has been classified as an internal affair of an uncharted sovereign dimension. Gote 13 intervention is now prohibited under Soul Society law. You are ordered to retreat to a safe distance and continue observation only. Acknowledge. Retreat. The word was a slap in the face. She was to abandon these people, abandon Naruto, and simply watch as their home was torn apart by an enemy she was sworn to fight. It was the law. It was her duty. She looked at Naruto. He was standing his ground, a lone bastion of cold fury against a tide of monsters, protecting a village that had for so long treated him as a pariah. He wasn't fighting because of an order. He was fighting because it was the right thing to do. Because these were his people. His home. Her choice was not a choice at all. She crushed the hell butterfly in her fist, its spiritual energy dissipating into nothing. Orders be damned, she muttered. She turned to Naruto, her eyes blazing with a defiant fire he had never seen before. You're right, we stay together, but we need to end this fast. I have an idea, Naruto said, a grim smile on his face. But I'm going to need a really big distraction. He closed his eyes for a moment, concentrating. The great ice wall he had created began to groan and shift. Then, with a sound like a cracking glacier, it reformed. Dozens of perfect, solid ice clones of Naruto and Rukia rose from the wall, each one looking utterly real. Though they did not move, the Arankar, confused, focused their fire on the motionless clones, blasting them with seros and spiritual bolts. That won't hold them for long, Rukia said. It doesn't need to, Naruto replied. He grabbed her hand. Trust me. She looked at their joined hands, then into his piercing blue eyes. Always. He pulled her with him, not forward, but down. He stomped his foot, and the street beneath them cracked open. Instead of falling into a sewer, they dropped into a tunnel of pure, smooth ice that Naruto had formed in a split second. It twisted and turned, a subterranean slide moving at impossible speed. It was disorienting, but Rukia could feel its purpose. He wasn't just moving them, he was following the energy lines of the village, eating for the largest concentration of enemy power. They burst out of the ground in the central plaza, emerging in a shower of ice and earth. In the center of the square stood Riker, the Arankar lieutenant. Surrounded by his personal guard, he had been using the plaza as a command center, directing the strike teams. He looked up, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes as Naruto and Rukia landed before him. Impressive, Riker hissed. You pinpointed my location. You made it easy, Naruto said, his body already glowing with a silver-white aura. Your ego has its own energy signature. Riker sneered. A clever child, but you have made a fatal error. You have brought the fight to me, leaving the rest of your village to my soldiers. Did I? Naruto asked. Just then, from a high rooftop, a silent figure watched the unfolding chaos. It wore a simple, dark cloak that concealed its form, its face hidden in shadow. It made no move to interfere, simply observing the clash of energies, the fusion of shinobi and shinigami. The corrupted power of Kageyama's forces. It was a being of immense, ancient power, an observer from the Celestial Council. It registered Rukia's defiance of the Soul Society's direct order. It registered Naruto's evolving, reality-bending abilities. It tilted its head, a silent judgment being passed on this chaotic, beautiful, and utterly imbalanced little world. Riker lunged, his movements snake-like and impossibly fast. He aimed not for Naruto, but for Rukia, correctly identifying her as the more conventional fighter. His hand transformed into a wicked, bone-white blade. Rukia met his charge, Soda no Shirayuki a blur of white. Steel met bone in a shower of sparks. She was skilled, a prodigy even, but Riker was a former Espada-level Arankar. He was stronger, faster. He drove her back, his relentless assault leaving no room for her to cast her Kido. You fight with the grace of a noble, Riker mocked, their blades locked. But you lack the killing intent of a true warrior. He shattered her guard with a powerful blow, sending her stumbling back. He raised his blade hand for the final strike. He never got the chance. Get away from her, Naruto's voice was not a shout. It was a low, guttural growl, the sound of an avalanche beginning its descent. The temperature in the entire plaza dropped to an unnatural, painful low. The moisture in the air didn't just freeze, it crystallized. Riker turned, his eyes widening in shock. Naruto was a vision of cold, divine wrath. His hair was almost entirely white now, his eyes glowing with a light that seemed to come from the heart of a frozen star. 9 ethereal tails, made not of chakra but of pure, swirling silver mist and ice, drifted lazily behind him. He had not lost control. He had taken it. This was the full, untamed power of the snow fox spirit, willingly unleashed. He raised a single finger. From the sky above, a spear of pure, condensed cold, looking for all the world like a shard of a frozen star, descended. It didn't fall with speed, but with an inexorable, terrifying certainty. Riker stared, mesmerized by the absolute power. He knew he could not dodge it. He could not block it. It was not an attack, it was a judgment. A concept. It was the very idea of end, given form. Lord Kageyama, he whispered, as the spear touched him. There was no sound, no explosion, just a silent, expanding sphere of white light. Riker and his guards were not frozen. They were erased, unwritten from reality. The light expanded, washing over the plaza, and then contracted, vanishing as if it had never been. Naruto stood alone in the now silent square. The 9 tails of mist receded back into him, his hair returning to its familiar blonde, save for the single white streak. He swayed on his feet, the sheer exertion of the attack hitting him all at once. Rukia rushed to his side, steadying him. Naruto, are you okay? Just tired, he breathed, leaning on her for support. All across the village, he could feel the remaining Arankar, their link to their commander severed, faltering in their attacks before being cut down by the Konoha shinobi. The assault was over. They stood together in the ruined plaza, the setting sun casting long shadows around them. They had won, but the cost was written in the smoking buildings and the cries of the wounded. The lines between their worlds had not just been blurred. They had been shattered, and in the face of it all, Rukia had made her choice. She was no longer just an observer. She was a combatant, a defender of this village. His partner. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Past. The silence in the Hokage's office was heavier than the smoke that still hazed the evening sky. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of the day's battle, the echo of explosions. The phantom sting of ozone and corrupt energy, the quiet, ever-present hum of loss. Naruto stood before Tsunade's desk, fatigue etched into his features, a deep weariness that went beyond the physical. Beside him, Rukia stood as still as a statue, her expression a mask of stoicism that couldn't quite hide the turmoil in her eyes. 14 Chunin and 3 Jonin, Tsunade said, her voice a low, dangerous rumble. She wasn't looking at them, but at a list of names on a piece of paper, each name a fresh wound to the village she led. Over 50 civilians injured. The west wall will need to be entirely rebuilt. They hit us, Naruto. Hard, and they knew exactly where to cut. Jiraiya, foregoing his usual perch by the window, leaned against the wall next to Kakashi. The Nin's face was stripped of all its usual levity, leaving only the grim visage of a spymaster who had seen the opening moves of a war he didn't yet understand. This Kageyama, Jiraiya said, his gaze fixed on Naruto. He wasn't just testing you. The attack on the archives, the hospital, he was gathering intelligence on our infrastructure, our response times, our leadership. And he was using these, Arankar, to do it. Cannon fodder, but highly effective. They were strong, Rukia stated, her voice steady despite the internal conflict raging within her. And their energy was a perversion. A foe. RCED fusion of hollow Ryutsu and shinobi chakra. It's an abomination. An act of profound disrespect to the nature of souls. He's building an army, Kakashi added quietly, his single eye conveying the gravity of the situation. An army that can fight on 2 fronts, using tactics from both our worlds. Tsunade finally looked up, her gaze landing on Naruto. It was a complex look, a mixture of pride, fear, and profound worry. Your idea, in the plaza, that spear of light, what was it? Naruto shook his head, running a hand through his hair. The single white streak seemed more prominent now. I don't know. I just reached for the power I needed. I wanted to end it. To protect everyone. And it answered. It was Jiraiya who stepped forward then, his expression unreadable. He placed a heavy, sealed scroll on Tsunade's desk. It was ancient, the canvas yellowed with age, the ink faded. The seal was the spiraling crest of the Uzumaki clan. I think I know what answered you, Naruto, Jiraiya said, his voice heavy. After your power first awakened, I went to the ruins of Uzushio. There are texts there, in the sealed archives, that not even the third Hokage could decipher. But your blood is the key. He gestured to the scroll. I believe I've found the source. Tsunade looked at the scroll, then back at her Sannin teammate. What is it? It's not just a bloodline, Tsunade. It's a pact, a vow made at the dawn of the shinobi era, Jiraiya explained, his eyes turning to Naruto. The Uzumaki clan didn't just have powerful seals and immense life force. Their founder, Ashina Uzumaki, faced a world overrun with spirits. A time when the veil between the physical and the spiritual was thin. He sought a way to bring balance, to protect the living from the dead, and the dead from the ambitions of the living. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He traveled to a place he called the Silent Mountain, a nexus of worlds, and there he made a pact with a being of immense power. It wasn't a demon like the tailed beasts. It was something else, a divine spirit, a kitsune, they called it. But not of fire. It was a great snow fox, a guardian of the balance, a being of stillness and soul. The pact was simple. The spirit would lend its power to the Uzumaki bloodline, sleeping within them, and in return, the Uzumaki would act as its anchor in the physical world, the arbiters of that balance. Naruto stared at the scroll, his mind reeling. A divine spirit, another being sealed inside him, alongside the Kyuubi. Your mother carried it, Jiraiya continued, his voice softer. The potential was dormant in her, as it has been for generations. But the seal Minato used on you, it was a masterpiece of layered fuinjutsu. He didn't just seal the 9 tails inside you. He wove the cage for the fox directly into the heart of the older, ancestral seal that contained the snow fox. He created a prison within a prison. When you nearly died fighting Kagero, the 9 tails Asparate surge of power didn't break the seal, it cracked the barrier between the 2 prisons. It woke the guardian up. So what does that make me? Naruto asked, his voice barely a whisper. The first of your kind, Jiraiya answered. You're a Jinchuriki to 2 entities. A demon of chaos and a deity of order. But more than that, the fusion of their energies, of your own chakra, has made you a natural linchpin. A living bridge between the world of the shinobi and the world of the soul reapers. You don't just exist in one, you exist in both. That's why Kageyama wants you. With your power, he wouldn't just rule a world. He could merge them and become a god of a new reality of his own making. The weight of the revelation was crushing. Naruto wasn't just a container anymore. He was the key, the prize, the very thing that was putting his entire world in jeopardy. He looked at Rukia, at the disciplined power she represented, and then thought of the monstrous Arankar. He was the common denominator, the nexus of the entire conflict. Later, the meeting concluded, leaving only exhaustion and unanswered questions in its wake. Naruto found himself on a rooftop overlooking the village, the cool night air a welcome relief. The sounds of reconstruction, hammering, shouted orders, the grinding of earth-moving jutsu, were a constant reminder of the day's violence. A soft whisper of movement announced Rukia's arrival. She landed silently beside him, her black Shinigami robes a stark contrast to the moonlight. They stood in silence for a long time, watching their worlds. His, a village of wood and stone, struggling to heal. Hers, a moon that hung in the sky like a gateway to a realm of spirits he now knew was real. It's my fault, Naruto said, his voice flat. All of this, if I wasn't what I am, none of this would have happened. That is a foolish thing to say, Rukia countered, her tone sharp but not unkind. You did not ask for this power. Guilt is a luxury a warrior cannot afford. It clouds judgment. Is that what they teach you in Soul Reaper School? He asked, a bitter edge to his voice. To just turn off your feelings. They teach us that duty comes before all else, she replied softly. That the balance is more important than any single life. They teach us that the law is absolute. She paused, her gaze distant. Today, I chose to ignore all of it. Naruto turned to look at her. In the moonlight, her violet eyes seemed to hold a universe of unspoken conflict. That message you got, he said. From that butterfly, it was an order to retreat, wasn't it? She didn't seem surprised he'd guessed. She simply nodded. My superiors do not see this as our fight. They see you as an anomaly to be contained or avoided. My orders were to stand down and observe. Why didn't you? Her gaze met his, and in that moment, the wall of noble pride and military discipline crumbled, revealing the fierce, loyal heart beneath. Because my orders were wrong, she said, her voice filled with a conviction that resonated deep in his soul. I saw you facing down an army to protect your home. I saw you use your power not just to destroy, but to heal, to save that old woman's soul. The law told me to see you as a threat to the balance. But what I saw was someone trying to protect it. I chose to trust my own judgment. I chose to trust you. Her words were a balm on his frayed nerves. She wasn't standing with him because of a mission. She was with him because she believed in him. He, who had spent his entire life begging for acknowledgement, had earned the loyalty of a death god from another world. Not with power, but with principle. Rukia, he began, the name feeling different on his tongue now, more personal. He was cut off by a sound that tore through the fabric of the night. It was a low, vibrational hum that escalated into a piercing shriek, like reality itself being ripped open. Above the Hokage monument, the air began to shimmer and distort. A black fissure appeared in the sky, a jagged tear in the world, and from it, two sliding doors of light appeared. A Senkaimon. The spiritual pressure that poured out was a physical force, a tidal wave of Suffoka. Ting power that dwarfed anything the Urankar had possessed. It was cold, aristocratic, and utterly absolute. It was the pressure of law, of judgment. Every Jonin in the village felt it and froze. Down in the streets, civilians collapsed, unable to breathe under the sheer weight of it. Naruto instinctively moved in front of Rukia, his own cold energy flaring to life, creating a sanctuary around them against the crushing Ryutsu. He looked up at the gate, his eyes glowing silver white. Two figures emerged. They didn't walk. They appeared, flashing from the gate to the top of the fourth Hokage's head in an instant. The first was a man with fiery red hair tied in a high ponytail and strange, tattoo-like markings on his brow. He was tense, his hand resting on the uniquely shaped Zanpakuto at his hip. The second figure was the source of the immense pressure. He was tall, slender, and impossibly graceful. He wore the white haori of a Gote 13 captain over his robes. His face, framed by long, black hair adorned with intricate kenseiken, was a mask of noble indifference. But his eyes, the color of twilight amethysts, were as cold and hard as diamonds. They swept across the damaged village with disdain, passed over Naruto as if he were an insect, and settled on Rukia. Rukia gasped, her body going rigid. Ni-sama. Rukia Kuchiki's gaze was a physical weight. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His words carried across the distance, clear and cutting as shattered glass. Rukia, you have defied a direct command from the Captain Commander. You have interfered in the affairs of the living. You have allied yourself with a dangerous, unclassified entity, bringing dishonor and suspicion upon the name of Kuchiki. He spoke of her as if she were a flawed tool, not his sister. Every word was a hammer blow. Not of anger, but of cold, unyielding judgment. Renji Aburai, his lieutenant, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between his captain and the girl he had grown up with. By the laws of the Soul Society, Rukia continued, his voice the final pronouncement of a gavel, you are under arrest. You will be returned to the Seraite to face the judgment of Central 46. Naruto felt Rukia tremble behind him. He didn't know the intricacies of her world's laws, but he knew tyranny when he heard it. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also the flicker of defiance she was trying so desperately to hold onto. He took a step forward, the ground around his feet frosting over. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it cut through Rukia's oppressive spiritual pressure like a shard of ice. She's not going anywhere. For the first time, Rukia Kuchiki deigned to look at him. There was no curiosity in his gaze, no respect for the power he was sensing. Only a cold, profound contempt. He saw not a warrior, not a person, but a problem. A disruption to the perfect, unchanging order he had sworn his life to uphold. You are the anomaly, Byakuya stated, his voice flat. The source of this disturbance. Your existence is the crime for which she is being punished. Step aside. You'll have to make me, Naruto replied, his body now humming with the silver-white energy of the snow fox. Byakuya's spiritual pressure intensified tenfold, a mountain of force intended to crush Naruto into the rooftop. But Naruto's power met it head-on. The air between them crackled. A visible distortion where the absolute zero of the snow fox met the unbending Ryutsu of the Kuchiki clan head. A silent, desperate battle was being waged in the space between them. Kakashi, Tsunade, and a dozen Anbu appeared on the surrounding rooftops, their faces grim. They could feel the titanic power struggle, knew they were utterly outclassed, mere spectators to a clash of gods. Byakuya's hand, elegant and pale, moved with serene grace to the hilt of his Zanpakuto. So be it, he said, his voice a whisper that promised annihilation. You will learn the price of defying the law. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Price of Defiance. The air atop the Hokage monument was a grinding of tectonic plates. Two worlds, two philosophies, embodied by two men, were locked in a struggle that was fell. In the very bones of every shinobi present. On one side was Rukia Kuchiki's spiritual pressure. Ancient, vast, and unyielding as granite, the weight of 1,000 years of law and tradition. On the other was Naruto's power. A vortex of absolute cold, a stillness so profound it felt like the end of all things. It did not push back against Byakuya's Ryutsu, it negated it, creating a silent, zen bubble of defiance in the suffocating atmosphere. Renji Abarai shifted his weight, sweat beading on his tattooed brow. He had felt his captain's spiritual pressure countless times, but this was different. To see it met, to see it stopped cold by a stranger in an orange jumpsuit, it was like watching someone try to punch the ocean. You have no comprehension of what you are meddling with, boy, Byakuya said. His voice devoid of emotion. It was a statement of fact, not a threat. The law is not a suggestion. It is the pillar that prevents all worlds from collapsing into chaos. Your friend broke that law. The consequences are absolute. The only thing I see collapsing is your sister, because you're crushing her with the weight of your precious rules. Naruto shot back, his voice ringing. With a conviction that was its own form of power. The silver-white energy around him flared, the frost on the stone at his feet spreading another inch. She made a choice. She stood for something. That's not a crime. That's called having a spine. Ni-sama, Naruto, please, stop. Rukia's voice was a frayed cord, stretched to the breaking point between the two immovable forces in her life. Byakuya ignored her. His eyes, fixed on Naruto, were filled with a profound, almost pitying disdain. You speak of choice as if it is a virtue. A child chasing his whims. A true warrior understands that duty is the surrender of choice for the sake of order. A lesson you will now learn. He moved. It was not a flash step. It was an absence of transition. One moment, he was standing 50 feet away. The next, he was in front of Naruto. The tip of his sheathed Zanpakuto aimed at Naruto's throat. It was a movement so fast, so perfect, that even Kakashi's Sharingan barely registered the motion, only the result. Naruto didn't have time to think. He reacted. An instinct born of his new power took over. A jagged, ugly shield of ice, thick as a castle wall, erupted from the ground between them. It was a crude, desperate defense. Byakuya didn't even slow down. His sheathed sword struck the wall. It did not break it. It passed through it, a flicker of spiritual energy shattering the ice into a million pieces without a sound. The tip of the scabbard continued on, striking Naruto squarely in the chest. The force was incredible. Naruto flew backward, skidding across the stone face of the monument, air driven from his lungs in a painful gasp. He rolled to a stop, coughing, a deep ache spreading through his sternum. It wasn't a killing blow. It was a dismissal, the swat of a hand against a fly. Your power is immense, Byakuya stated, not a hint of exertion in his voice as he walked calmly toward Naruto. But it is unrefined, a wild, thrashing beast. Like its master, he appeared above Naruto, his foot raised for a disabling stomp. Naruto slammed his palms on the ground. The entire surface of the fourth Hokage's head was instantly coated in a frictionless sheet of black ice. Byakuya's foot came down, expecting solid stone. and found nothing to purchase. For the first time, a flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossed his features. His perfect, practiced poise was broken as he was forced into a controlled slide. It was the only opening Naruto needed. He pushed off the ground, not attacking, but creating distance. As he moved, he dragged his fingers along the icy surface. 3 clones, solid and translucent, sculpted from the same diamond-hard ice, rose from the ground. They were perfect replicas, and unlike his shadow clones, they didn't radiate chakra in the same way. To a spiritual sensor, they were just extensions of the cold that now permeated the area. The 3 clones charged Byakuya. Tricks and illusions, Byakuya said with contempt. He drew his blade, Senbon Sakura, its steel gleaming in the moonlight. His movements were a blur of lethal grace. He dispatched the first clone with a clean, vertical slash that cleaved it in 2. He spun, his blade a silver arc, and shattered the second clone at the waist. The third, he simply bypassed with a flash step, appearing behind it and piercing it through the back. But it was a feint. The clones weren't meant to win. They were meant to distract. As Byakuya pierced the third clone, the real Naruto was behind him, a Rasengan of swirling, frost-infused chakra roaring in his palm. The cold energy stabilized the normally chaotic sphere, making it smaller, denser, and eerily silent. Too slow, Naruto grunted, thrusting it forward. He hit nothing but air. Byakuya was gone. He reappeared a dozen yards away, standing calmly, his back to Naruto. "Your speed is commendable for a human," the captain said, his voice carrying the chill of finality. "But you are trying to catch the wind in a net." He raised his blade, holding it vertically before him. "The lesson is over. Shire," he whispered, and the word was a death sentence. Senbon Sakura. The blade of his Zanpakuto dissolved. It did not vanish. It scattered, refracting the moonlight into a million points of light, a breathtakingly beautiful cloud of what looked like cherry blossom petals. But Naruto's senses screamed at him. They weren't petals. They were microscopic blades, a swirling storm of steel, each one a razor edge, all guided by their master's will. The pinkish cloud surged forward, not as a single wave, but as a swarm, engulfing Naruto from all sides. His simple ice shields, no matter how thick, were useless. The tiny blades found every seam, every weakness, and began to shred them into powder. Pain erupted all over Naruto's body. 1,000 tiny cuts, shallow but agonizing, opened on his arms, his legs, his face. His jacket was ribbons in seconds. It was an inescapable, all-encompassing attack. He was being flayed alive by a beautiful, deadly storm. "Naruto!" Rukia screamed, her hand flying to her own sword, though she knew she was helpless to interfere. Through the pain, through the shredding of his skin, Naruto felt a profound clarity. He couldn't block it, he couldn't dodge it, he couldn't outrun it, so he would have to do something else. He wouldn't fight the storm. He would become the calm at its heart. He stopped trying to create shields. He stopped trying to move. He stood his ground, closed his eyes, and reached deep inside himself, past the caged rage of the Kyuubi, to the silent, serene cold of the snow fox. He didn't ask for a weapon. He didn't ask for a shield. He asked for its nature. For its essence. The silver-white aura around him collapsed inward, disappearing completely. For a moment, it seemed as if his power had been extinguished. But then, the air around him began to warp. There was no light, no sound. Just an invisible, expanding sphere of absolute zero. It was not a physical barrier. It was a conceptual one. An aura of pure stillness. The swirling blades of Senbon Sakura, which moved with supernatural speed, entered the 3-foot sphere around Naruto. And they stopped. Their kinetic energy was not deflected. It was stolen, leached away by the profound cold. The furious pink swarm slowed, grew sluggish. A delicate tracery of frost bloomed on each microscopic blade. Their momentum died. Their flight ended. They simply fell. A gentle metallic rain tinkled on the stone around Naruto's feet. The inescapable storm of Senbon Sakura, the pride of the Kuchiki clan, lay dormant. And frozen in a perfect circle around him, rendered utterly impotent. Silence. Even Byakuya, the master of composure, could not hide the profound shock in his eyes. His Shikai, an ability that had defeated countless powerful foes, had been nullified. Not by a greater force, but by a principle he could not comprehend. Naruto opened his eyes. They were glowing with a soft, silver light. The thous and shallow cuts on his body were already sealing themselves with a fine, white frost, leaving no scars. "You're right," Naruto said, his voice calm and clear, echoing in the stunned silence. "I can't beat you in a fight. You're faster, more skilled, more experienced. I can't win." He took a step forward, the frozen blades crunching under his boot. "But I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to tell you that you're wrong." He pointed a hand, not at Byakuya, but at Rukia, who stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. "You talk about law and order, but you can't see the person standing right in front of you." Naruto's voice rose, filled with the emotional clarity he'd fought so hard to find. "You see, a Kuchiki, who brought dishonor. I see Rukia, my friend, who fought for my home, who stood with me when she was ordered to run. That's not a crime you can punish. It's a bond, and if your laws say that bonds are illegal, then your laws are broken." Each word was a stone thrown at the perfect, cold castle of Byakuya's beliefs. And for the first time, they seemed to be leaving cracks. Byakuya looked from Naruto's unwavering, glowing eyes to his sister's tear-streaked face. He saw her defiance, her fear, her loyalty, all the messy, chaotic emotions he had suppressed in himself for decades in the name of duty. "You, who are you?" Byakuya asked, the question a genuine crack in his armor of indifference. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki," he replied simply, "and I protect my friends. That's my law." Byakuya stood motionless for a long time. The hilt of Senbon Sakura reformed in his hand. He could escalate. He could unleash his Bankai. He could likely reduce this entire monument to rubble and kill the boy where he stood. But what would that accomplish? The boy had not beaten him, but he had not lost, either. He had fought a captain's Shikai to a standstill, not with power, but with an ideal given form. To continue the fight would be to admit that his principles required brute force to enforce. A concession his pride would not allow. He turned his back on Naruto, a gesture of dismissal that felt less convincing now. "Renji, we are leaving." "But Captain," Renji protested, confused. "What about Rukia?" "The judgment of Central 46 is not a thing to be defied," Byakuya said, his voice as cold as ever, but something had shifted beneath the surface. He did not look at his sister. "Consider this, Rukia. The world you have chosen to defend is fragile. The anomaly you have chosen to align with is a beacon for chaos. The next time the law comes for you, it may not be my hand that wields the sword." It was a warning, but it was also a reprieve. With a final, lingering look at Naruto, a look that held a new, complex mixture of emotions, Rukia Kuchiki flash stepped away, Renji following a half-second later. The Senkaimon pulsed and vanished, taking their crushing spiritual pressure with it. The silence they left behind was deafening. The silver light in Naruto's eyes faded. The aura of absolute zero dissipated. The immense strength that had held him up vanished, and his knees buckled. The strain of maintaining that conceptual defense, of battling a being like Byakuya, had pushed him to his absolute limit. Rukia was there before he hit the ground, her arms wrapping around him, supporting him. "You idiot," she whispered into his shoulder, her voice thick with tears and relief. "You absolute, reckless, impossible idiot." He just leaned against her, utterly spent, a small smile on his face. "Yeah," he breathed, "but I'm your idiot." Kakashi and the others landed softly on the monument around them. They said nothing. They had just watched their student, the unpredictable knucklehead of Konoha, stand up to a god of death and prove that the strength of a bond could be just as absolute as any law. In a realm of shadow and whispers, Kageyama watched the last vestiges of Byakuya's spiritual pressure fade from a shimmering portal. A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. "Perfection," he hissed to the figures kneeling before him. The proud captain of the 6th Division, the embodiment of the law, drawn away from the Seraite to deal with a minor disruption. He has left the heart of the Soul Society exposed to protect its fringes. He turned his gaze to a detailed schematic of the Seraite projected in the air. His finger traced a path to a building deep within its most protected sector. The Sokyoku Hill, but his target wasn't the execution grounds. It was the vast, hidden library of forbidden Kido and Soul Reaper history beneath it. He went to retrieve a wayward sister, Kageyama mused. His eyes gleaming with intellectual hunger. I shall retrieve the knowledge to unmake a god. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Serpent's Shadow. The clinical sterility of the Konoha hospital room was a stark contrast to the storm that had just passed. Naruto lay on the bed, not wounded, but depleted in a way that felt deeper than bone and muscle. It was a soul weariness. The exhaustion that comes from standing against a concept and bending it, if only for a moment. Tsunade had run every diagnostic imaginable, only to conclude that his chakra coils were fine. His physical body was healing at its usual astonishing rate, but his spiritual energy, the core of the snow fox's power, was in a state of deep hibernation, as if it had expended a year's worth of power in a single night. Jiraiya stood at the foot of the bed, his arms crossed, the usual twinkle in his eyes replaced by a hard, calculating glint. Rukia sat in a chair by the window, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on the village below. She hadn't left his side since he'd collapsed. So, that's it then, Tsunade said, breaking the heavy silence. She slapped a file down on the bedside table. Rukia Kuchiki isn't just a captain. He's a one-man army. The fact that you're alive, Naruto, and he left empty-handed, is a victory so improbable it borders on a miracle. It doesn't feel like a victory, Naruto said, his voice raspy. He pushed himself up, leaning against the headboard. He'll be back, or someone worse will. He won't be back, Rukia said, her voice quiet but firm. She didn't turn from the window. Not for me, at least. In his mind, he has given his warning. He has upheld the honor of his duty by passing judgment. For him to return for the same reason would be redundant, and add me. Seizen that his first action lacked finality. His pride will not allow it. But he left the door open, Jiraiya countered, his eyes narrowing. He said the next time the law comes, it might not be his hand. He's washed his hands of you, girl, and left you to the wolves. Finally, Rukia turned. The conflict within her was now a resolved, hardened thing. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. Then let them come. I made my choice on the rooftops during the attack. I made it again when I stood behind Naruto. My place is no longer in the Seraite. My duty is no longer to a set of laws that would condemn a man for defending his home. My duty is here. Her violet eyes met Naruto's, and the unspoken declaration hung in the air between them. My duty is to you. The weight of her words settled in the room. She had committed treason. She had abandoned her home, her family, her entire existence, for a village and a person she had known for a handful of weeks. Naruto felt a surge of something fierce and protective. The exhaustion seemed to recede, replaced by a burning resolve. She had laid everything on the line for him. He would not let her regret it. Then we stop waiting for the wolves to come to our door. Naruto said, his voice gaining strength. We go out and hunt them. The strategy room in the Hokage Tower was a place of shadows and hushed, serious tones. A massive map of the elemental nations was spread across the central table, littered with markers and notes. Present were the highest echelons of Konoha's strategic command. Tsunade, Jiraiya, Homura and Kaharu, the village elders, and Shikaku Nara. The Jonin commander and the sharpest mind in the village. Naruto, now fully recovered and dressed in a fresh jacket, stood at the head of the table, Rukia at his side. He had requested the meeting. A move that had raised eyebrows, but his actions against Byakuya had earned him a new level of respect. He was no longer just a weapon, he was a player in the game. Kageyama's strategy is based on two principles, Naruto began, his voice even and confident, betraying none of the nervousness he felt under the gaze of so many powerful figures. Disruption and intelligence. His attack was a test. He threw his Urankar at us to see how we'd react, to gauge our strength, and to confirm I was his target. Shikaku Nara, leaning back in his chair with his eyes closed as if he were asleep, spoke without opening them. A sound analysis. He now knows our defensive protocols and has a better understanding of your capabilities. A troublesome development. Exactly, Naruto continued. So we change the game. We've been defensive. We wait, we guard, we react. That gives him all the power. He chooses the time, the place. We need to take that away from him. He leaned forward, placing a finger on a location far from Konoha, a small, unassuming town in the land of rivers. We know his agents are using a corrupted fusion of chakra and ryutsu. That kind of energy leaves a signature, a residue. Rukia can sense it. I can see it. Instead of waiting for it to show up at our gates, we should be actively hunting it down. Kaharu, one of the elders, scoffed. You suggesting we send our most valuable asset, and our only expert on the enemy, out into the wilderness on a glorified tracking mission. It is reckless. It's more reckless to sit here and wait for to build an army big enough to wipe us off the map. Naruto countered, his voice sharp. Every day we wait, he gets stronger. He finds more rogue ninja, more lost souls to twist into his soldiers. He can't win a war of attrition against an enemy who can raise troops from the dead. We have to cut the head off the snake. Or at the very least, start chopping it into pieces. Shikaku finally opened his eyes. He looked at Naruto, a flicker of genuine surprise and appreciation in his lazy gaze. The boy wasn't just talking about fighting. He was talking about proactive, targeted counterinsurgency. It was unconventional, high risk. But the logic was brutally sound. He's right, Shikaku said, his voice cutting through the elders' murmurs of disapproval. What a drag, but he's right. Kageyama's greatest strength is that he's operating from the shadows. By taking the initiative, we force him to react to us. We disrupt his supply lines, we dismantle his experiments, we force him to pull his resources back to defend himself. It puts us in control of the tempo. He gave Naruto a small, tired smile. It's a bold move. I like it. Tsunade looked from Shikaku to Naruto, then made her decision. The council's concerns are noted, but I agree with Shikaku. A new hunter squad will be formed. Effective immediately. Naruto Uzumaki, Rukia Kuchiki, you two are its core. Your mission. Seek and destroy Kageyama's network. Cut off his resources. Gather any intelligence that will lead us to his primary location. You will have priority access to Anbu support and Jiraiya's spy network. You leave at dawn. The town of Kawanomura was a humid, perpetually damp settlement built along the winding canals of the land of rivers. It was a place of transience, a haven for those who didn't want to be found. And it reeked of Kageyama's influence. Rukia could feel it as a sour note in the spiritual atmosphere, and Naruto could see it as a faint, oily slick that seemed to coat the very stones of the oldest district. Their target was a dilapidated warehouse at the edge of the docks. Intel from Jiraiya's contacts had marked it as a point of interest. They moved like ghosts across the rooftops, the moon hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. Inside, Rukia whispered, her senses on high alert. I feel at least 20 spiritual signatures. But they're muddy, unstable. They slipped through a high window, landing without a sound on the rafters above the main floor. The scene below was a grotesque tableau. A dozen rogue shinobi, their Hittite scratched out, stood in a nervous line. At the head of the line, one of Kageyama's agents, a pale man in a lab coat, was holding a struggling, translucent spirit, in a cage of dark keto. Before him, a kneeling Ronin was gritting his teeth as another agent performed a gruesome procedure, forcibly fusing the terrified soul into the Ronin's body. The man screamed as his chakra and the soul's ryutsu mixed, his body convulsing, one-like fragments beginning to sprout from his skin. A recruitment drive, Naruto muttered in disgust. He's offering power to the desperate by turning them into half-baked Arankar. This has to be stopped, Rukia said, her hand already on her sword. This defiles both the living and the dead. No killing, Naruto ordered, his voice low and absolute. These aren't soldiers. They're victims. We shut it down, we capture the agents. And we purify the souls. That's a much harder mission, she pointed out. Yeah, he said with a grim smile. Let's get to work. They dropped from the rafters. The attack was a blur of calculated chaos. Before the alarm could be raised, Naruto slammed his palms on the floor. Not spikes, but a wave of profound cold washed across the room. It wasn't enough to kill, but it instantly froze the mechanisms of the containment unit, solidified the keto cage, and caused the two agents to seize up, their movements becoming sluggish and clumsy. Rukia was a white flash, her blade striking not with its edge, but with its flat. She moved through the stunned rogue ninja, a series of precise, disabling blows to their necks and joints rendering them unconscious before they could even draw their weapons. Her movements were economical, brutally efficient. The head agent, recovering from the initial shock, snarled and hurled a blast of corrupted energy at Naruto. Naruto didn't bother with a shield. He simply raised a hand, caught the glob of dark energy in a cage of ice, and crushed his fist. The frozen energy shattered into harmless dust. "Playtime's over," Naruto said, his eyes glowing. He moved on the last conscious agent, the one who had been performing the fusions. But before he could reach him, the recently transformed Ronin let out a roar. His fusion was complete, but unstable. He was a monster of mismatched parts, lashing out blindly in pain and rage. He swiped at Naruto with a newly formed bone claw. Rukia was there, her blade intercepting the claw with a sharp clang. "Naruto. The souls." Naruto nodded, trusting her to handle the berserker. He focused on the real problem. The spirits trapped in the Kido cage. He placed his hands on the frozen bars, pouring his purifying cold into it. As he had done with the old woman's spirit, he wasn't destroying, he was separating. The dark energy of the cage flaked away, and the terrified pluses within were freed. With a series of quick, gentle taps from her sword's pommel, Rukia, having already subdued the Ronin, performed Kanso on each one, sending them peacefully on their way. They left the unconscious shinobi tied up for the local authorities and took the two agents with them for interrogation. Tucked away in the head agent's coat, they found a map. It was a trade route, but several ions in the deserts bordering the land of wind were circled. Ancient ruins, shrines, places of forgotten power. Their hunt had its first real lead. Days later, in a hidden fortress carved into a desolate mesa, Kageyama stood before a gathered assembly. His followers were a motley collection, a rancor of his own design, rogue shinobi from every nation, and even disgraced soul reapers who had bought into his vision. They looked upon him with a mixture of fear and messianic reverence. "The old worlds are dying." Kageyama's voice, amplified by Kido, boomed across the cavern. He was a master orator, his charisma a palpable force. The shinobi world drowns itself in an endless cycle of hatred and war, generation after generation. The soul society stagnates under the weight of its own inflexible laws. A gilded cage that has forgotten its purpose. Both are failed systems, clinging to the fading echoes of their glory. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "But we are the future. We, who understand both worlds. Who embrace the fusion of their energies. We will forge a new world from the ashes of the old. A world of perfect order. A world of strength. A world with a single, guiding will to ensure eternal peace and stability." His followers roared their approval. "There is one who stands as the living embodiment of this future," Kageyama continued, his voice taking on a more personal, almost seductive tone. He looked directly into a floating orb that was broadcasting his message to his agents across the nations. "Naruto Uzumaki, you are the proof that my vision is not a dream, but a destiny. The shinobi of Konoha see you as a weapon to be controlled. The nobles of the Soul Society see you as an aberration to be eliminated. They fear you. They will never understand you." He extended a hand, as if reaching out to Naruto himself. "I do. I see your potential not as a threat, but as a gift. I offer you a place at my side. Not as a soldier, but as a symbol. A brother. Together, we can accelerate the coming of the new age. Why bleed to protect a broken world that will only cast you aside? Join me, and we will build a world that will kneel in gratitude at your feet." The desert wind was cold under the diamond-sharp stars. Naruto and Rukia sat by a small, smokeless chakra fire, the map spread between them. A messenger hawk had arrived an hour ago, carrying a scroll with a transcript of Kageyama's speech. Courtesy of Jiraiya's network, Rukia watched Naruto's face as he read, looking for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of temptation. Kageyama's words were poison, tailored perfectly to prey on the years of loneliness and rejection Naruto had endured. Naruto finished reading, rolled up the scroll, and tossed it into the fire. He watched it burn, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "He's smart," Naruto said finally, his voice quiet. "He's not trying to beat me. He's trying to recruit me." "Do his words tempt you?" Rukia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Naruto looked up from the fire, his glacial blue eyes meeting hers. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "A world that kneels at my feet." He scoffed, shaking his head. He thinks the point of having power is to make people kneel. He looked out at the vast, silent desert, then back at her, and his expression softened into the familiar, stubborn resolve she had come to admire more than anything. He doesn't get it. The point of having power is so you can stand up. So you can protect the people you care about from ever having to kneel to anyone. He tapped the map, his finger landing on the next circled ruin. He's looking for something in these old shrines. Something to finish his plan. We're going to find it first. Rukia smiled, the last of her fears dissolving into the cold desert air. They were tired, outnumbered, and hunting a monster who wanted to unmake reality. But looking at Naruto, she felt no doubt. Kageyama had charisma, an army, a grand vision. But they had something stronger. They had a purpose. The hunt was on. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Divine Mandate. The desert shrine wasn't marked on any modern map. It was a skeleton of wind-scoured stone rising from the dunes. A place the world had agreed to forget. But as Naruto and Rukia approached, they felt the wrongness of it. The air was thin and still, humming with an ancient, dormant power that felt like a third, alien thing, neither the wild, living energy of chakra nor the ordered, soul-bound flow of Ryutsu. It was the energy of the world itself, raw and untamed. This place, Rukia whispered, her hand resting on Soda no Shirayuki's hilt. The veil between worlds is thin here. It's like the air itself is listening. Kageyama's been here, Naruto said, his gaze fixed on the shrine's entrance. His glacial blue eyes could see the faint, greasy residue of corrupted energy clinging to the stone, a stark violation of the shrine's natural sanctity. He's not just using these places. He's tainting them. They entered, moving with the practiced silence of predators. The interior was a labyrinth of crumbling sandstone corridors, but the path was clearly marked for those who knew what to look for. Intricate fuinjutsu seals, glowing with a faint, malevolent purple, were etched into the walls, designed to ward off shinobi. Woven between them were shimmering, invisible barriers of Kido, meant to repel soul reapers. He's combined the defensive arts of both worlds, Rukia noted, analyzing a Kido barrier. It's a Bakudo spell, but reinforced with a chakra-based matrix. I can disrupt the spiritual component, but the chakra, is my job, Naruto finished. He placed his palm flat against the wall beside the seal. A wave of pure, cold energy flowed from his hand, not overpowering the seal, but flowing around it, seeping into the stone and freezing the chakra pathways that powered it. The purple glow of the fuinjutsu flickered and died. At the same moment, Rukia tapped the invisible barrier with the pommel of her sword. And the Kido spell dissolved with a soft hiss. They were a key unlocking a door designed to be impassable. Deeper they went, until they emerged into a vast, circular chamber. The ceiling had long ago collapsed, leaving the chamber open to the star-dusted sky. The walls were covered in a single, breathtaking mural, its colors still vibrant despite the passage of centuries. It depicted the world they knew, but it was overlaid with the ghostly, celestial image of another, the Seraite, its white towers piercing the sky like phantom limbs. Between the two, a great, celestial serpent of energy was coiled, its fangs biting into both realms. At the serpent's heart was the image of a man with 9 fox-like tails of pure white. The convergence, Rukia breathed, her eyes wide with horrified understanding. It's a myth, a forbidden text in the great archives. It speaks of a time when the worlds were one, and a great cataclysm split them apart. It was believed to be an irreversible event. He doesn't want to conquer the worlds, Naruto said, his voice grim as he traced the image of the white-tailed figure. He wants to put them back together. To smash them into one. And to do that, a new voice echoed through the chamber, smooth and filled with condescending pity. One requires a catalyst. The linchpin. The divine bridge. A man stepped from the shadows. He was a soul reaper. Clad in the pristine white howrie of a captain, but the number on his back, the symbol of the 11th division, had been violently torn away. He was handsome, with silver hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. His smile was a cruel, beautiful thing. Ginjo Ishida, Rukia said, her blood running cold. Captain of the 11th division. You vanished a century ago. It was said you were killed on a mission in Hueco Mundo. A convenient fiction, Ginjo replied with a dismissive wave of his hand. I simply grew tired of the Gote 13's short-sightedness. Lord Kageyama offered a vision worthy of my talents. His storm-gray eyes settled on Naruto. And here is the proof of that vision. The living key to reuniting the fractured universe. He drew his Zanpakuto. The blade was a strange, iridescent black, and it seemed to warp the very air around it. This is the last focusing lens, boy. For months, Lord Kageyama has been traveling to these ancient shrines, reactivating them, preparing the way. Now, all he requires is a surge of your divine energy to begin the final ritual. A surge I will be more than happy to provide by tearing it from your corpse. He vanished. Naruto's senses screamed, but there was nothing to see, nothing to feel. Ginjo simply ceased to exist in one spot and began to exist in another, directly behind Rukia, his blade poised to strike. But Naruto wasn't tracking the man. He was tracking the world. He felt the subtle compression of space, the ripple in reality. He didn't turn. He stomped his foot. A massive, curved wall of ice erupted from the floor between Ginjo and Rukia, perfectly intercepting the blow. Ginjo's blade struck the ice and didn't shatter it. The space around the point of impact folded, the ice wall bending into an impossible, distorted shape before it broke. My Zanpakuto, Kukenyugami, allows me to warp space, Ginjo explained with the arrogance of a master. Your walls are meaningless. Every defense is just a door I can choose to open. He attacked again, his movements a series of disorienting spatial jumps. He was everywhere at once, his blade striking from impossible angles. Naruto and Rukia were back to back, a tiny island in a sea of attacks. Naruto's ice, a perfect defense against physical threats, was being bypassed and bent. Rukia's swordsmanship, precise and deadly, was useless against a target who was never where he seemed to be. We can't keep this up. Rukia grunted, parrying a blow that seemed to come from inside her own guard. Then we change the battlefield. Naruto roared. He slammed both hands on the ground. This time, he didn't create a wall. He poured his power into the very floor of the chamber, a wave of absolute cold spreading outwards. He wasn't just freezing the surface, he was infusing the entire area with his energy, making the space itself thick, heavy, and sluggish. Ginjo jumped again, but this time his movement was slower, labored. What is this? He snarled, feeling as if he were moving through molasses. My field, Naruto said, his eyes glowing. You can warp space, but you still have to move through it. And right now, all of it belongs to me. The tide turned. With Ginjo's primary advantage blunted, Rukia pressed the attack. Her blade was a blur of white, a dance of deadly frost forcing the rogue captain onto the defensive. Naruto supported her, manipulating the ice-infused battlefield, creating pillars to block Ginjo's retreats, coating the ground in frictionless ice to break his footing. They were a perfectly synchronized engine of combat. And then, the world stopped. The sound of their battle, the desert wind, even the beat of their own hearts, it all went silent. A presence descended upon the chamber, a power so vast and so utterly neutral that it made Byakuya's Ryutsu feel like a child's tantrum. It was the pressure of existence itself. Hovering in the center of the ruined chamber was a being of impossible geometry. It was a shifting, multifaceted crystal of pure light, constantly folding in on itself, emitting a low, harmonic chime that resonated directly in their minds. It had no face, no limbs, no voice. It simply was. The paradox has reached critical mass. The being communicated, its thoughts a wave of pure, unfeeling logic that washed through their minds. The fusion of energies within the mortal vessel designated Naruto. Uzumaki has created a sustained fissure in the laws of dimensional integrity. The entity designated Kageyama seeks to exploit this fissure. This is an unacceptable outcome. What are you? Rukia breathed, her body frozen. Not by cold, but by sheer, primal awe. We are the Celestial Council. I am its arbitrator. Our mandate is the preservation of cosmic balance. The vessel's existence is the source of the imbalance. To restore order, the source must be unwritten. The aberration must be erased. There was no malice in its declaration. It was a diagnosis, a doctor prescribing a cure for a universal cancer. And Naruto was the tumor. Ginjo, who had been frozen like them, suddenly laughed, a wild, ecstatic sound. The gods themselves have come. They see the truth. Erase him. Erase the bow. Why and let Lord Kageyama usher in the new age? The arbitrator turned a fraction of its crystalline form towards Ginjo. The entity designated Kageyama as a corruption. His goals are a perversion of order. He, too, is scheduled for erasure. Quote. Ginjo's laughter died in his throat. The arbitrator focused on Naruto. Prepare for nullification. Reality broke. The ice on the floor didn't melt. It turned into a cloud of screaming spectral butterflies. The stone walls of the shrine twisted like taffy. The very air turned to grinding sand. The arbitrator wasn't attacking them with energy blasts, it was attacking them with the fundamental laws of the universe, turning physics itself into a weapon. A wave of pure gravity slammed into them, trying to crush them into the floor. Naruto roared, his 9 silver tails of mist erupting from his back, his power flaring to meet the conceptual assault. He created a field of stillness, a bubble where the laws of physics were his to command, pushing back against the crushing force. But it wasn't enough. The arbitrator was on a different level. It pointed a facet of light at Rukia's Zanpakuto. Soda no Shirayuki, it chimed in their minds. An instrument of thermal reduction. A primitive concept. The beautiful white blade began to flake away, turning to rust and dust in her hands. No, Rukia cried, pouring her own Ryutsu into her sword, fighting to hold it together. They were being unmade, piece by piece. Caught between the relentless, reality-bending assault of the arbitrator and the opportunistic strikes of Ginjo, who had renewed his attack. His spatial warping now amplified by the chaotic environment. Rukia, Naruto yelled, his voice strained as he held back a wave of temporal distortion that threatened to age them into dust. Our powers, they're the same at their core. Stillness, cold, match my will. Don't fight its power, fight its concept. It was a desperate gamble, an idea born of pure instinct. Rukia looked at her disintegrating sword, then at Naruto. His face a mask of supreme effort, holding back the apocalypse for her. She understood. She closed her eyes, shutting out the impossible chaos. She didn't focus on her sword's edge or its form. She focused on its soul. The soul of Soda no Shirayuki was not about ice. It was about the cessation of all things. The state of absolute zero, where even the vibration of spirit particles ceases. Naruto felt the shift in her. He poured his own will into the connection between them, his power flowing not to her, but in harmony with her. Their energies resonated, the silver wit, of the snow fox and the pure white of Soda no Shirayuki merging into a single, blinding light. Resonance cascade, the arbitrator noted with what might have been clinical curiosity. An unforeseen development. Rukia's sword did not reform. It transformed. The blade became a thing of pure, black light, a sliver of the void. It did not radiate cold, it radiated absence. The dust that had been flaking off it was drawn back in, unmade. Bankai, Rukia whispered, the word stolen by the utter silence her new form commanded. Haka no Tagame, the censure of the white haze. A pillar of absolute nullity erupted around her. Not a brilliant white, but a profound, absorbing blackness that seemed to drink the light. The arbitrator's reality-warping attacks entered the field, and vanished, their conceptual weight erased. Now, Naruto, Rukia screamed, the Bankai taking a terrible toll on her. Naruto acted. He didn't attack the arbitrator directly. He focused all his power into one concept, stillness. He created a perfect, three-dimensional field of absolute zero time around the celestial being. For a single, eternal picosecond, the arbitrator, a being of constant, shifting motion, was frozen. Trapped. In that frozen moment, Rukia moved. She appeared before the arbitrator, her blade of void black light held high. She slashed down. There was no sound, no impact. The blade simply passed through the crystalline form. A single, perfect black line appeared across the arbitrator's body. The line began to spread, not as a crack, but as an encroaching void, unmaking the being's very structure. Logic. Error. It chimed in their minds, its voice staticky, corrupted. Recalibrating. Paradigm. Shift. With a final, silent implosion of light, the arbitrator vanished. It had not been destroyed, merely, defeated. Forced to retreat. Ginjo stared, his arrogant smile gone, replaced by a look of pure, uncomprehending terror. He had witnessed two mortals wound a god. He turned to flee, to warp himself away. But his escape was cut off. He was trapped between Naruto's field of frozen space and the encroaching aura of Rukia's Bankai. They turned to him, their eyes glowing as one. Naruto raised a hand. The ground beneath Ginjo turned to a perfect, black mirror of ice. Rukia pointed the tip of her void blade at the rogue captain. The pillar of absolute nullity contracted, engulfing him. There was no scream, just a flash of utter blackness, and then, nothing. All that remained was a statue, not of ice, but of frozen time, Ginjo's final look of terror preserved for eternity. Rukia's Bankai dissipated. The void black blade returned to its pristine white form, and she collapsed, the strain too much. Naruto was there, catching her, his own 9 tails fading as he knelt, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. They were alive. They had won. They lay there for a long time, in the silent, ruined shrine, under a sky that once again obeyed the laws of physics. They had faced down a rogue captain and a celestial god. And they had discovered that the war for their world was also a war for their very right to exist in a universe that now saw them as a disease. Naruto looked at the mural of the convergence, at the great serpent coiled between 2 worlds. He finally understood. Kageyama wasn't just a threat. He was a symptom. The real enemy was the imbalance itself. And the only way to stop the universe from erasing him was to prove it didn't need to. He had to save the world to save himself. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Soul King's Gambit. The silence that followed the arbitrator's retreat was more profound than any sound. It was the silence of a world that had been held in a god's fist and then, impossibly, released. Naruto lay on the cool sandstone floor of the shrine, Rukia's head resting on his chest. Her breathing was shallow, her spiritual energy a flickering candle in the aftermath of the all-consuming storm of her Bankai. He could feel the phantom ache in her soul. The price of wielding a power of such absolute finality. He gently brushed a strand of black hair from her face. Her eyes fluttered open, the deep violet clouded with exhaustion. Did we? She began, her voice a dry rasp. We won, Naruto finished for her, though the word tasted like ash in his mouth. We're alive. It called you an aberration, she whispered, the memoir. Why of the arbitrator's conceptual voice a fresh wound? A thing to be erased. Yeah, well. Naruto managed a weak, tired grin. Get in line. He looked up at the pristine, star-filled sky, now mockingly peaceful. First Konoha, then the Soul Society, now the guys in charge of reality itself. Seems like nobody wants me around. The self-pity was a familiar cloak, but he shrugged it off. He looked down at Rukia, at the fierce, unwavering loyalty in her eyes. But they don't get to decide. We do. She pushed herself up, her movements stiff. This changes everything, Naruto. Kageyama isn't just a rogue soul reaper seeking power anymore. He is a catalyst for a cosmic crisis. The Celestial Council, they won't just send another arbitrator. They'll send an army, or they'll simply unmake this entire solar system to correct the imbalance. Winning that one battle just put us on a timer. He knew she was right. They hadn't solved the problem. They had become it. They had proven that the imbalance, him, could fight back. To a being like the arbitrator, that made him infinitely more dangerous. Then we have to fix it, Naruto said, his resolve hardening into something cold and sharp. We have to stop Kageyama and stabilize whatever he's trying to break. We have to prove to the universe we're the cure, not the disease. He stood, pulling her to her feet. They were a pair of ragged, exhausted children standing against a concept. But in that shared moment of impossible defiance, they were the strongest thing in the universe. They had each other. The Seraite was a city built on a foundation of absolute order. That foundation was cracking. In the 12th Division barracks, alarms shrieked with a hysteria that science was not supposed to possess. Technicians scrambled, their voices overlapping in panicked shouts. Captain, the spiritual wave form is off the charts. It's not Ryutsu. It's not chakra. It's the frequency of the dimensional membrane itself. Another signature detected. Brief, but divine. It matches theoretical models of a celestial class entity. Captain Mayuri Kuritsuchi stood before his primary monitor, a look of ecstatic, ravenous glee on his painted face. A resonance cascade, a forced Bankai induction, a confrontation with a celestial. He giggled, a high, unhinged sound. Oh, That boy is a treasure trove of fascinating new ways for the world to end. Get me a direct line to the head captain. Tell him his adherence to archaic laws is about to be rendered catastrophically irrelevant. The news spread through the Gote 13 like a shockwave. An emergency assembly of the captains was called, and the Great Hall, usually a place of solemn decorum, was a hotbed of barely contained chaos. A celestial being intervened in the living world. Captain Jashiro Yukitaki said, his gentle face pale with concern. That hasn't happened since the age of the Soul King himself. It is the direct result of this anomaly. This, Naruto Uzumaki, Captain Soifun of the 2nd Division snapped. Her voice sharp as a hornet's sting. He is a cancer. He draws the attention of cosmic forces we are not prepared for. And Lieutenant Kuchiki has chosen to side with the disease. They must both be eliminated. Immediately. Now, Soifun, Captain Shunsui Kiraku countered, his lazy demeanor doing little to hide the keen intellect in his eyes. Isn't it more interesting this way? The boy and the little Kuchiki girl stood up to a god and are still breathing. I, for one, would like to see what they do next. Rushing to kill something you don't understand is such a vulgar response. The hall erupted into factions. Some argued for intervention, others for elimination, still others for a complete withdrawal, sealing the Soul Society off from the impending chaos. The pillar of law, the unshakable Gote 13, was paralyzed by indecision, their ancient rules and protocols utterly useless against a threat that came from outside their established reality. Hey, Captain Yamamoto stood in the center of it all, his eyes closed, his ancient hands gripping his cane. He felt the threads of order he had maintained for 1,000 years beginning to unravel. In the 6th Division headquarters, the air was cold and still. Rukia Kuchiki had felt it all. The faint but unmistakable ripple of an unknown captain-class Ryutsu, Ginjo. The terrifying, alien pressure of the arbitrator. And then, the echo that had shaken him to his core, the blossoming of a Bankai. His sister's Bankai, a power she should be decades from achieving, released in a desperate, uncontrolled surge. The cold mask of the law-abiding captain was gone, replaced by the grim visage of an older brother who had just felt his sister brush against the edge of self-annihilation. His rigid adherence to the law, the very thing that had demanded he abandon her, was now screaming at him that the law was insufficient. The threat was greater than a simple breach of protocol. His sister was entangled, in a war that dwarfed the Soul Society itself. His promise to his late wife, Hasana, to always protect Rukia, even from herself, warred with his public vows to uphold the law. The crack that Naruto had put in his soul was now a gaping chasm. He made a choice, not as a captain, but as a Kuchiki, Senbon Sakura, he whispered to the silent room. And in a flutter of unseen petals, he was gone. While the Gote 13 debated, Kageyama acted. He stood with his elite guard not in the deserts of the human world, but in a darkened, forgotten corridor deep within the Seraite itself. He had used Byakuya's initial, brash departure as his cover, slipping through the Senkaimon's wake. While the captains were distracted by the events in the mortal realm, he had walked, unopposed, into the heart of their fortress. The fools are arguing about the storm, Kageyama mused to his lieutenant, Riker's replacement. They haven't realized the flood is already inside the house. His destination was not the barracks or the assembly hall. It was a place few even knew existed. The subterranean chamber of origin, directly beneath the great archives. In it was kept not a text, but a thing. A celestial orrery, a working model of the dimensional planes, crafted by the first Soul King. It was the master control panel for reality. It was a power no single being was ever meant to touch. The shrines have been attuned, Kageyama declared. Entering the vast, dark chamber. The orrery floated in the center, a collection of glowing spheres and shimmering rings of light. The boy's resonant battle with the Celesti. Al has amplified his connection to the membrane tenfold. He is now the perfect anchor. He placed his hands on the orrery. Dark, corrupted energy poured from him, a perversion of Kido that made the celestial device scream. He thinks he is my enemy, Kageyama said, a triumphant, ecstatic smile spreading across his face. He doesn't realize he is my primary tool. In the desert, the world began to tear. Naruto and Rukia felt it first as a nauseating lurch, as if the ground had dropped out from under them. The sky above the shrine did not darken, it shattered. Jagged, Black lines spread across the dome of the heavens like cracks in glass. Through the cracks, they saw it. The impossible, breathtaking sight of the Seraite's white towers, hanging upside down in their sky. The desert sand began to drift upwards, flowing towards the phantom city in the clouds. Their worlds were being pulled together. He's started it, Rukia gasped, stumbling to keep her footing on the suddenly unstable ground. He's forcing the convergence. He's using me, Naruto grunted, clutching his head. He could feel it now, 1,000 metaphysical ropes tied to his soul, pulling, stretching, using his very existence as the gravitational center to drag two dimensions into a catastrophic collision. The shrines, they're like amplifiers, and I'm the main speaker. They had to get to Kageyama. They had to get to the source. But he was in another dimension, a world away. They were helpless, stranded on the front lines of a war whose battlefield was reality itself. A fissure of black and white light tore open the air beside them. A Senkaimon. It opened with a precision and stability that spoke of immense power. Rukia Kuchiki stepped through. He was not dressed for battle, but for judgment. His expression was a mask of cold, imperial fury. His eyes were not on the impossible sky, but on Naruto and Rukia. Ni-sama, Rukia cried out, a mixture of shock, fear, and a flicker of hope in her voice. I am not here to save you, Rukia said, his voice cutting through the growing chaos. I am here to rectify a failure of the Gote 13. Kageyama has infiltrated the Seraite. The convergence is being initiated from within our own walls. This is a matter of internal security. His gaze fell on Naruto, and for the first time, there was no contempt. Only a cold, hard acknowledgement. You are the anchor for this cataclysm. Therefore, your presence is required at its source. Whether you come as an ally to correct it, or as a prisoner to be unmade once it is over, is irrelevant to me. My only objective is to stop the desecration of my home. It was the most Rukia had ever said at one time, and it was a declaration of an uneasy, unspoken truce. He was offering them a path, a way to the heart of the storm. Naruto looked at the stoic, proud Soul Reaper who had tried to arrest his friend just hours earlier. He saw the flicker of concern for Rukia that Rukia tried so desperately to hide. He saw a man whose rigid world had been broken, and who was now willing to break his own rules to try and piece it back together. We're coming, Naruto said, helping a still weak Rukia to her feet. Back in the Seraite, Head Captain Yamamoto's eyes snapped open. The ground of the assembly hall was shaking. He could feel Kageyama's foul, corrupted Ryutsu radiating from the very heart of the citadel. He had been played. His indecision had been the weakness Kageyama had exploited. His ancient spiritual pressure erupted, a pillar of fire and rage that silenced the bickering captains. The enemy is within. His voice boomed with the force of 1,000 years of command. All captains, mobilize your divisions. Our foe is not the anomaly in the living world. It is the traitor who defiles our home. Defend the Seraite. Eradicate the intruders. The Gote 13, finally given a clear target, exploded into action. As the desert sand of the mortal realm began to rain down upon the pristine streets of the Seraite, Naruto, Rukia, and a grim-faced Rukia Kuchiki stepped through the Senkaimon. They emerged into a world in chaos, a nightmarish fusion of two realities. Shinobi and Soul Reapers were already clashing with Kageyama's corrupted forces in the streets. The sky was a swirling vortex of sand and spirit particles. And in the distance, radiating a power that warped the very air around it, they saw the source. Kageyama, standing atop the Sokyoku hill, his hands raised to the heavens, laughing as he tore the universe apart at the seams. The final battle had begun. Chapter 9 End.